Hey everyone, and welcome to Nighttime Stories. I'm here to help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. Now, get comfortable and relax. Babysitting was something I never thought twice about. I had done it since I was 13, watching neighbors' kids, cousins, sometimes families I barely knew but who had gotten my number through word of mouth. By the time I was 17, it felt routine. Feed them, keep them entertained, tuck them in, and wait for the parents to come home. Easy money. That Friday night felt no different at first. The Millers called last minute, said they were in a bind. I had never sat for them before, but I recognized the name because my mom knew someone at the dad's office. Their place was on the edge of town, an older two-story with tall windows and a steep roof. The kind of house that looks like it should be on a postcard, except when you get close you realize the paint is peeling and the porch creaks when you step on it. When I walked inside, I noticed how clean everything was. Not cozy clean, not lived in, but spotless. No toys scattered on the floor, no family photos on the walls, nothing to make it feel like kids actually lived there. The furniture looked arranged, not used. The parents greeted me at the door with stiff smiles, almost like they had practiced them. They did not bother with small talk. They just told me the kids had already eaten, bedtime was 9 sharp, and to call if I needed anything. Then they were gone. The kids were in the living room, sitting side by side on the couch. The boy was 7, lanky and serious. His little sister was 5, small and round-faced, holding a stuffed rabbit by its ear. They stared at me for a long second before the boy asked if I had paper. Paper, I asked. For drawing, he said. His voice was calm, polite, like he was used to explaining himself. I dug through my bag and found a half-used sketch pad and a box of crayons. They both lit up, sliding off the couch and rushing to the kitchen table. I figured it would keep them busy for a while, so I set them up with the pad, spread the crayons out, and poured myself a glass of water. At first it was normal. The little girl hummed to herself, scribbling in red and yellow. The boy worked slower, carefully pressing lines into the paper. I scrolled on my phone, listening to the quiet scratch of crayons. When I checked their drawings, though, my stomach tightened. Both kids had drawn the same thing. Not castles or animals, but me, sitting at the kitchen table, just like I was in that moment. And behind me, in both drawings, stood a tall black figure, faceless, too long in the arms and legs, looming over my chair. I laughed awkwardly, trying to make it light. "Who's this?" I asked, tapping the shape. The girl lowered her crayon and whispered, "That's the man who lives here. He likes when you don't notice him." Before I could respond, the boy leaned across the table, shushing her sharply. He looked at me with wide eyes and said, "Don't turn around too fast, or he gets angry." I froze. They went back to coloring as if nothing had happened. I sat still, gripping my phone, every muscle in my neck aching from the urge to turn and check behind me. Finally, I forced a laugh. "You two have some imagination." Neither of them replied. The minutes dragged. Every time I checked their papers, the same fucking figure was there. Always behind me, sometimes close, sometimes leaning down like it was whispering. At one point I stood up and excused myself to the bathroom just so I could glance at the reflection in the mirror on the way down the hall. Nothing there. Just the living room behind me, the couch, the faint glow of the kitchen light. But when I came back, the kids had pushed a new drawing across the table, me again, and this time the figure's hand was resting on my shoulder. I told myself to stop letting it get to me. Kids draw monsters. They make things up. They test babysitters to see if they can scare them. That was all this was. Still, when the girl looked up at me and smiled faintly, it did not feel like a prank. It felt like she knew something I did not. At bedtime, I tried to shake it off. I read them a story, tucked them in, and turned off the light. The boy had taped one of his drawings above his bed, the one of me sitting on the couch with the figure in the corner of the living room. I asked why he wanted it there. "To warn you," he said. His voice was serious, too serious for a 7-year-old. Downstairs, the house seemed bigger without the kids' voices. Every creak of the old floorboards echoed louder. I cleaned up the crayons and stacked the sketch pad neatly, trying not to look at the pictures still scattered on the table. That was when the baby monitor crackled. It was not the kids. I knew what their voices sounded like, high and soft. These were lower, older, whispers that rose and fell, too faint to understand but too clear to ignore. I rushed upstairs. Both kids were asleep, breathing slow and steady. Their room was quiet, but in the hallway just outside their door, lying on the floor, was a new drawing, paper I had not given them, crayon strokes deep enough to nearly tear through. It showed me lying in the guest bed, and the tall black figure standing over me. I picked it up with shaking hands, the waxy lines smudging under my fingers. My pulse thudded in my ears. I checked the boys' desk, the girls' dresser, anywhere they might have hidden extra paper, but everything was empty. No loose sheets, no crayons out of place. When I looked back at the drawing, I noticed something I had missed at first. In the corner of the picture, scrawled in red crayon, was a single word: soon. The hallway light flickered. A floorboard creaked downstairs, and for the first time all night, I wondered if the kids' warnings were not part of a game at all. I stood there in the hallway longer than I should have, holding that drawing like it might explain itself if I stared at it hard enough. The word soon seemed heavier than crayon should allow, thick and waxy, like it had been pressed into the paper with intent. I told myself the kids must have done it earlier, before I arrived, and slipped it out as a prank. But when I glanced at the boy's room again, he was turned on his side, breathing slow and steady. The little girl clutched her rabbit, her lips parted in sleep. If they were pretending, they were far too good at it. I slipped the drawing into my pocket and backed down the stairs, telling myself not to be ridiculous. Kids make up stories. They test boundaries. They like to scare themselves. That was all. I repeated it under my breath as I walked into the kitchen. The sketch pad was still there, crayons scattered neatly across the table where I had left them. I flipped through the pages, each one showing the same thing. Me, at the table, with that figure behind me. In one, its head nearly brushed the ceiling. In another, it leaned down close to my ear. The drawings had a strange perspective, like the kids had been looking at me through another angle, seeing what I could not. I closed the pad quickly and shoved it aside. My pulse was too loud in my ears. I needed to calm down, to focus on something normal. I cleaned the kitchen again, though there was little to clean. The Millers kept everything too neat, too empty, like no one ever really used the space. The house itself was wrong in a way I could not explain. The living room had no family photos, no stacks of mail, nothing personal at all. The shelves had books, but when I pulled one down it was hollow, just a spine with blank pages glued in place. The couches looked like they had never been sat on. It felt like a set, a place designed to look lived in but never truly touched. At around 10, I sat on the couch with the remote in my hand, debating turning on the television to drown out the silence. That was when I felt it, a shift in the air, the faintest prickling on the back of my neck, like someone was standing behind me. I gripped the remote tighter and told myself not to turn. The boy's words echoed in my head. Do not turn around too fast, or he gets angry. I held still until the feeling passed. When I finally glanced back, there was nothing. Just the dimly lit kitchen, the neat table, the sketch pad waiting on the counter. The baby monitor crackled again. I jumped, fumbling with the volume. At first it was just static, low and uneven, then a sound like breathing. Slow, deliberate, too heavy for either child. I crept back upstairs, every step loud in the stillness. The hallway was empty, the kids' door shut. I opened it carefully. They were still asleep, both of them unmoving. The monitor sat on the dresser, its light flickering faintly. I reached for it, and that was when I noticed the girl's stuffed rabbit lying on the floor, a few feet from the bed. I bent to pick it up, placing it back beside her. When I straightened, I caught movement in the corner of the room. Not clear, not solid, just a suggestion of something too tall, its outline faint, dissolving as soon as my eyes landed on it. I froze, gripping the edge of the dresser. My breath caught in my throat. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. I backed out of the room, closing the door quietly behind me. My heart would not slow. I wanted to call the Millers, to demand where they were, when they would be back. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number they had left. Static. No ring, no voicemail, just hissing static. I hung up, tried again. The same. I tried a different number, my mom's, just to check. It rang fine. It was only their number that would not go through. Back downstairs, I sat on the couch again, my phone in my lap. The clock ticked toward 11. I kept checking the front window, hoping to see headlights, the relief of their car pulling into the drive. Nothing. The house creaked and shifted around me, as old houses do, but each sound felt too deliberate. A floorboard settling in the kitchen, a faint thump from upstairs, the brush of air against the back of my neck when no window was open. I pulled the sketch pad toward me without meaning to. Another page had been filled in. I flipped back and forth, counting. I knew I had gone through them all earlier, but now there was a new drawing on the last sheet. It showed me standing in the hallway upstairs, the kids asleep in bed, and the tall black figure crouched low, its hands resting on the edge of their mattress. My mouth went dry. I tossed the pad onto the couch and stood quickly, my pulse racing. I needed to leave, to get the kids and walk straight out of that house. But before I could move, the garage door rumbled open. Relief hit me so hard my knees almost buckled. The parents, they were back. I waited for the sound of the car, the footsteps, the front door unlocking. But the kids' door creaked upstairs. Tiny footsteps hurried down the hall. Both of them appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide, clutching each other. "Don't let them in," the boy cried, his voice cracked with fear. "It's not really them." The front door opened before I could respond. The Millers stepped inside, smiling too wide. Their clothes were neat, their hair in place, but something about them was wrong. Too stiff, too rehearsed, like their movements had been practiced. They did not ask about the kids. They did not even look at them. Their eyes were fixed only on me. The boy's hand slipped into mine, shaking. He whispered, "That's how he tricks people." When I turned back, the hallway was empty. The door was shut. The Millers were gone. Silence pressed down on the house again. The kids stood trembling beside me, their small hands clinging to mine. And for the first time, I realized we might not make it to morning. The silence after the Millers vanished was worse than their sudden appearance. The air seemed heavier, like the house itself had closed around us. The kids would not let go of my hands. Their fingers were ice cold, trembling as though they had run through snow without coats. I led them back into the kitchen, trying to act calm, though my chest was pounding. "It's fine," I whispered, more to myself than to them. "Everything's fine." But the kitchen was not fine. On the table, where I had left the sketch pad, there were now half a dozen loose sheets of paper, crayon drawings, the same black figure over and over. In each, the figure stood closer. One showed its hand stretched out toward the back of my head. Another had it bending low, face level with mine, though the face was still blank. The lines were rushed, frantic, like they had been drawn in seconds. I turned to the kids. "Did you do this?" Both shook their heads. The boy's eyes were wide. "We were upstairs," he whispered. "We don't draw that fast." My hands shook as I gathered the papers into a pile and shoved them aside. I needed a plan. We could not sit in that house waiting for something to happen. I told them we would stay together in the living room, all three of us. I thought maybe the television would distract them, keep things normal. But when I clicked it on, the screen did not show a channel. It showed a grainy black and white feed of the kitchen from earlier, me handing the crayons to the kids, them sitting at the table. And behind me, in the corner of the frame, The figure. It was not sketched this time, not imagined. It was there, faint but visible, looming. I switched the television off so fast, the remote slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. The boy whispered, "You saw him too." I forced myself to nod. Lying felt impossible now. The girl crawled into my lap, pressing her small face into my chest. "He doesn't like when you notice him," she whispered. "He wants you to act like he's not here." "Then how do we stop him?" I asked before I could stop myself. My voice cracked, desperate. The boy shook his head. "You can't stop him. You can only not make him mad." I wanted to argue, to say that was ridiculous, but the words caught in my throat. We sat in silence. The clock ticked past 11:30. My nerves were raw. Every creak of the house felt pointed, deliberate. The refrigerator's hum, the pipes shifting, the wind pressing against the old siding, all of it sounded alive. When I finally gathered the courage to move, I suggested we check that the doors were locked. We walked through the house together, my arms around both of them. Every lock was in place. The front door, the back door, even the windows, all sealed. But in the hallway by the stairs, we found another drawing lying face up on the floor. This one stopped me cold. It showed the three of us standing by the front door, holding hands. And the figure blocking the exit, its arms stretched wide, too long, like it could span the entire frame of the house. The boy bent to pick it up, but I stopped him. My hand shook as I held it instead. The lines were heavy, angry. This one had been drawn with force. I tucked it under my arm and hurried the kids into the living room again. "Stay here," I whispered, though I had no idea where I thought I was going. I crept toward the guest room where I had left my bag. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out, desperate for contact with anyone. The screen lit up with a text from an unknown number. A picture. It was of me, sitting on the couch in the Millers' living room just seconds earlier. The kids clutched against me, and behind us, standing so close its head nearly touched the ceiling, was the figure. My legs went weak. I almost dropped the phone. I hurried back to the living room, my heart slamming against my ribs. The kids looked at me, their faces pale, their eyes filled with the kind of fear children should never know. The boy whispered, "He doesn't like when you show people. He only wants us." I shoved the phone into my pocket and sat down, pulling them close. I wanted to run, but the idea of opening the door and stepping into the night with that thing outside felt worse than staying. The girl whispered, "He doesn't like when you try to leave. He gets mad." "How do you know?" I asked. Her eyes welled with tears. "Because the last babysitter tried." I stared at her, my throat tightening. "What happened to them?" The boy answered, his voice flat. "They didn't come back." I wanted to believe it was just a story, something the kids made up, but the way he said it, calm and certain, made my skin crawl. We sat in silence for what felt like hours. The house creaked, the air thick and stale. The kids eventually dozed against me, too tired to fight it anymore. I held them both, my eyes locked on the shadows stretching across the walls. At some point, I must have closed my eyes, because the next thing I knew, the baby monitor hissed again. My head jerked up. The kids stirred, but did not wake. Through the static came a voice. Not whispers this time. A single word, low and guttural, drawn out until it distorted. "Soon." I swallowed hard, clutching the kids tighter. The living room window rattled softly. I turned toward it before I could stop myself. Outside, pressed against the glass, was the pale suggestion of a face. No features, no eyes, just smooth emptiness stretched into a grin too wide for a human mouth. I squeezed my eyes shut and whispered, "Please go. Please." When I opened them again, the window was empty. But on the table where the sketchpad had been, a new drawing sat waiting. It showed me asleep on the couch. The kids gone, and the figure alone, its hands stretched across the page, as if it was finally close enough to touch. I sat frozen, staring at that last drawing on the table. The lines were jagged, frantic, pressed into the paper so hard the crayon had broken in places. My own face was sketched in profile, eyes closed, my body limp against the couch. The kids were gone from the page, erased or never drawn at all. Only the tall figure remained, its arms stretched across the edges as if it was holding the paper itself. I wanted to tear it up, to burn it, but a sick feeling in my stomach told me that destroying it would only make things worse. Instead, I slid it beneath the stack of other drawings, hiding it from view. The kids were still sleeping, their heads resting against my sides, and for a moment I thought maybe I had imagined all of it. Maybe I was just overtired, letting the creaks of an old house and the wild imaginations of children get to me. That moment of calm lasted only seconds. From upstairs came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to belong to either child. Each step groaned against the old wood, dragging slightly before lifting again. They crossed the hallway, paused, then started down the stairs. I tightened my arms around the kids, trying not to wake them. My chest pounded so loudly I thought for sure it would wake the whole house. The steps drew closer, descending until they reached the landing just outside the living room. I forced myself to stand, easing the children down onto the couch. I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a lamp, clutching it like a weapon. The steps stopped. The air felt thick, suffocating. I raised the lamp high, ready to swing, but when I turned toward the doorway, there was nothing. The hallway stretched out empty, shadows pooling in the corners. I lowered the lamp slowly, my hands slick with sweat. Behind me, the boy stirred. His voice was groggy but firm. "You can't fight him," he whispered. "He doesn't care about things like that. Ever do. Every 2 men. Every do 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 men." I crouched beside him. Then what does he want? The boy's eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw tears welling. "He wants you to see him." The girl woke next, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "We shouldn't have drawn him," she whispered. "He only comes when we draw him too much." My throat tightened. "Then why did you keep drawing?" She shrugged, small shoulders trembling. "We don't always choose. Sometimes our hands just move." I looked at the sketch pad, the pile of drawings on the table, and felt a cold certainty settle over me. This thing was using them, their crayons, their small hands, to pull itself closer into the world. Every page was a doorway, every line a thread. The house gave another long groan, as if it understood my thoughts. I knew I could not sit there until dawn. The waiting was worse than the thought of leaving. I told the kids we were going to the car, that we were going to find someplace safer. They did not argue, but their faces fell. "He won't like it," the boy warned. The girl clutched her rabbit tight. "He doesn't like outside." Still, they followed me. I gathered my bag, shoved the sketch pad inside against my better judgment, and took both their hands. We walked carefully to the front door. Every step echoed too loudly. I felt exposed, like the walls themselves were watching. When I reached for the lock, the knob was ice cold under my palm. I twisted it, pulled the door open, and froze. The figure stood there, filling the doorway. It was taller than I imagined, its head brushing the frame, shoulders hunched unnaturally to fit. Its body was blacker than shadow, like it absorbed all the light around it. Its face was blank, smooth, except for the faint impression of a mouth curled into something like a smile. The kids whimpered and clung to my legs. I slammed the door shut, locking it again with shaking hands. My lungs burned. The boy's voice was thin with fear. "I told you. He doesn't like outside." The girl tugged my sleeve. "We have to go upstairs. It's safer when he's down here." I wanted to argue, but I had nothing left. My instincts screamed to flee. but the only exit was blocked. I scooped the girl into my arms, grabbed the boy's hand, and hurried back toward the stairs. As we climbed, the air grew heavier, pressing against us like water. The lights flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. We reached the hallway in near darkness. I pushed them into the boys' room and closed the door behind us. My phone's screen was the only light, faint and blue. I pulled it out, desperate, and tried calling again. Every number went to static, even numbers that had worked earlier. The boy sat on his bed, pulling his knees to his chest. He doesn't want you to call anyone. The girl curled against me, whispering into my shoulder. He just wants you. My stomach dropped. Why me? Neither answered. The monitor crackled to life again. At first it was the same low static. Then a voice. Not the whisper from before. Not guttural. This was a child's voice, faint but clear. It said my name. The girl shook her head violently, pressing her hands over her ears. The boy whispered, "Don't listen. That's not us." The voice repeated my name, sweeter this time, almost sing-song. Then it added, "Come downstairs, too." I turned the monitor off, heart hammering. The boy pointed at the taped drawing above his bed, the one of me sitting on the couch with the figure in the corner. His hand shook as he tapped the page. He makes things real when we draw them. But if we stop drawing him, maybe he'll go. My mind raced. Could it be that simple? If the drawings gave him shape, maybe destroying them would take it away. I pulled the sketch pad from my bag, flipping to the pages. Each one was the same figure, closer and closer. The girl reached for it with shaking hands. "He won't like that." "I don't care," I whispered. I tore a page free. The house groaned instantly, louder than before, the walls shuddering like in anger. The boy shouted, "Stop." But I had already ripped another, then another. With each tear, the air grew colder. The light from my phone flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. From the hallway came the sound of footsteps, heavy, slow, dragging, closer with each beat. The girl screamed, clutching my arm. The boy buried his face in his knees. The doorknob began to turn. The doorknob twisted slowly, metal scraping against metal, deliberate and unhurried. I pressed my back against the door, my arms spread wide as if I could hold it shut with my own weight. The wood was cold against me, vibrating faintly with each turn of the knob. The boy whispered from the bed, "It doesn't matter if you block it. He's already inside." I clenched my jaw, refusing to look at him. "Stay quiet," I hissed. My breath fogged the air even though the room was not cold enough for that. The girl clutched her rabbit tighter, her knuckles white. The knob stilled. For a moment the only sound was the three of us breathing in the dark. Then came a knock, 3 sharp raps against the wood, so loud the door shuddered in its frame. I almost jumped out of my skin. The boy shook his head. "Don't answer." I stayed frozen. Another 3 knocks. This time softer, almost playful, followed by a long scrape down the length of the door. The sound of nails or claws dragging wood. My chest ached with every breath. I forced myself to whisper, "We can't just sit here. We need to end this." The boy's eyes shone faintly in the dark. "You can't end it. You can only survive it." I shook my head. "No, that's not good enough." I pulled the sketch pad back into my lap. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, torn edges crinkling under my fingers. Most were destroyed, ripped in half, but a few remained untouched. Each one showed me in some vulnerable position, sitting, sleeping, standing unaware, and the figure always looming. I grabbed one of the crayons and pressed it to the page. The wax squeaked under my hand. What are you doing?" the boy demanded. "If he can use these drawings to make himself real," I whispered, "then maybe I can use them too." The girl whimpered. "He won't like that." "I don't care what he likes." My hand moved fast, sketching a doorway, a rectangle with harsh lines. Then I drew the 3 of us holding hands, stepping through it. Behind us I scrawled the figure, But this time I drew it shrinking, its arms pulled inward. I pressed hard, carving the crayon into the paper like I could trap him there. The house groaned again, louder this time. The doorknob rattled violently, turning back and forth as if someone was furious outside. The girls sobbed into my shoulder. I held up the drawing. "Look," I told them, desperate. "We make the rules, not him." The boy did not look convinced, but his small hand reached for mine anyway. I grabbed it, then pulled the girl close with my other arm. Together we stared at the page. The air shifted. The knocking stopped. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then the closet door creaked open. My head snapped toward it. The faint glow from my phone's dead screen gave me just enough light to see movement inside. Tall, hunched, a shape unfolding in the darkness, like it had been waiting there all along. The figure stepped out slowly, too large for the small room, its head brushing the ceiling, its faceless face tilted toward me, blank but intent. The girl screamed. The boy pulled against my hand, but I held on tighter. I shoved the drawing toward the thing, crayon lines smudging under my grip. "Stay on the page," I whispered, my voice shaking. "That's where you belong." The figure leaned closer. The smell of damp earth filled the room, thick and suffocating. My stomach lurched. Its hand rose, long fingers stretching toward me, the tips grazing the air just above the paper. For a second I thought it worked. The lines on the page seemed to shimmer faintly, like the drawing itself was pulling him in. Then the crayon snapped in half in my grip. The figure straightened, its blank face turning slightly as if amused. The page in my hand blackened at the edges, curling with heat that came from nowhere. I dropped it with a cry, and it turned to ash before it hit the floor. The boy's voice was barely a whisper. "He makes the rules, not us." The figure stepped forward, and the walls of the room shuddered. A picture frame fell and cracked against the floor. The bed shook, the mattress trembling beneath the boy's small body. I grabbed the children and backed into the far corner, my body pressed against them as if I could shield them with my own skin. "Please," I begged. My voice broke. "Please don't." The figure stopped. It tilted its head, considering. Then it raised one long finger and pointed at me. The boy's breath hitched. "He chose you." The figure lowered its hand, turned, and slipped back into the closet. The door shut with a click, leaving the room silent once more. I collapsed to my knees, clutching the children. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold them. The girl sobbed quietly into my shoulder. The boy stared at the closet, his expression blank, resigned. "He's not gone," he whispered. "He's waiting. He always waits." I wanted to argue, to tell them we had survived, that it was over, but I could not force the words past my throat. The house was too still, too heavy, like a held breath. I kept the kids close until exhaustion finally dragged us down. I must have dozed off against the wall, because the next thing I knew, faint morning light was leaking through the curtains. The air felt lighter. The weight lifted. I shook the children gently awake. Their faces were pale, their eyes rimmed with red, but they were alive. We crept downstairs together. The house looked normal again. The sketchpad was gone from the table. The pile of drawings had vanished. The living room looked untouched, as if nothing had happened. But on the refrigerator, stuck beneath a plain magnet, was a single new drawing. It showed me, standing alone in the living room. No kids, and the figure's hand resting on my shoulder. The drawing on the refrigerator held me there longer than I care to admit. I stood in the kitchen with both children pressed against my legs, staring at the paper like it might leap from the magnet and wrap itself around my throat. The figure's black hand rested so casually on my sketched shoulder, as if it had already claimed me. The kids did not speak, did not move, just watched me watch it. When I finally pulled the page free, the magnet clattered to the floor. The wax felt damp under my fingers, like the crayon had only just been pressed to the paper. I wanted to crumple it, to tear it into shreds, but something about the weight of the house stopped me. It felt like eyes were waiting for my choice, daring me to make the wrong move. So instead, I folded the drawing neatly into quarters and slid it into my bag. The boy whispered, "He will follow you now." The girl asked, "Will you still come back?" I swallowed hard, crouching to meet their eyes. "No," I said quietly, with more honesty than I meant to share. "I will not come back here." Their faces did not change. They only nodded, as if they had known the answer already. We sat in silence until the clock in the hallway chimed 7. Pale morning light filled the windows. I gathered my bag and the children followed me to the front door. The lock clicked open easily, the knob warm beneath my palm. Outside, the street was quiet. Birds sang in the distance, the ordinary sound jarring after the night's madness. The driveway was empty. No cars, no sign the Millers had ever returned. I walked the kids to my car, opened the back door, and helped them inside. They did not argue, did not ask questions. Their small bodies slumped against the seats, eyes hollow with exhaustion. When I turned the key, the engine caught on the first try. Relief washed through me in a flood so strong I nearly sobbed. I pulled out of the driveway, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror. By the time we reached the main road, the kids were asleep, their heads lolling softly against the windows. I did not know where to take them. I thought about the police, about trying to explain what happened. But what could I say? That a faceless shadow had stepped out of the walls? That crayon drawings came to life? They would think I had lost my mind. Instead, I drove them back to my own house. By the time we arrived, the kids were stirring. They followed me inside quietly, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug while I made them toast and poured juice. For a brief moment, it felt normal. 2 kids eating breakfast, cartoons playing softly on the television. My heart began to slow. Then the boy set his cup down carefully and looked at me. "You cannot keep us," he said. The girl nodded. "We belong to him." A chill ran down my spine. "No," I whispered. "You are safe here. You do not belong to anyone. It is not Redding. But the boy only shook his head. "That is not how it works." Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, perfectly spaced. My breath caught. The children did not flinch. I stood, every nerve screaming, and approached the door. Through the peephole, no one waited outside. The porch was empty. Still, I did not open it. When I turned back, the kids were gone. Their plates were empty, their cups rinsed clean and placed neatly on the counter. Only the faint smell of toast lingered. I searched the house frantically, calling their names. Every room was empty. No footprints on the carpet, no sound of movement. It was as if they had never been there at all. In the living room, resting where they had sat, was another drawing. This one showed my house, sketched in crooked lines, the windows dark. In the center was me, standing alone. Behind me, taller than the roof, was the figure. My stomach turned. I grabbed the paper, ready to tear it apart, but stopped. Something shifted at the edge of my vision. In the reflection of the darkened television screen, I saw him. Tall, faceless, his head bent low to hover just behind my shoulder. I spun, swinging the paper like it was a weapon, but the room was empty. The screen still showed him. I backed away until my legs hit the couch. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I clutched the drawing tight, crumpling it in my hand. That was when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out with shaking fingers. A new text from an unknown number. Just one image. It was me, sitting exactly where I sat now, clutching a crumpled drawing in my fist. And behind me, clear and sharp, the figure leaned down, its hand resting on my shoulder, exactly as the sketch on the refrigerator had shown. I dropped the phone, bile rising in my throat. The house was silent, too silent. And then I understood. It was never about the Millers, or the children, or the house. It was about me. The children were only bait, sketches in someone else's story, pieces to draw me in. I forced myself to smooth the crumpled drawing on the coffee table. My hands shook as I reached for a crayon that had rolled from my bag, red, blunt-tipped. I pressed it to the page and began to draw, fast and desperate. I drew the figure small this time, shrinking with each line. I drew walls around it, chains binding it, words scrawled across the page like bars. My hand cramped, wax breaking under pressure, but I did not stop until the paper was covered. The air in the room thickened, pressing against my chest. The walls groaned, the ceiling cracked faintly. The reflection in the television flickered. The figure leaned closer, then blurred, its outline smearing into static. I pressed harder, filling every inch of the page until the crayon snapped in half. The drawing was complete. Silence. The weight lifted from the room, just slightly. The air eased. The reflection in the screen showed only me. I slumped against the couch, every muscle shaking. When I dared to look at the page, the figure was still there, bound in crude lines, small and contained, for now. I folded the drawing carefully and slid it into my bag. That night, I slept with the lights on. No knocks came, no whispers from the monitor, no new drawing slid under the door. But in the morning, when I checked my bag, the folded paper was gone, and taped neatly to the inside of my front door was a new drawing. Me, sitting at my table. The figure behind me, its hand, once again, resting on my shoulder. This time, though, there was writing beneath it. Shaky, in black crayon, "You drew the door. We can come through yours now." I burned the paper in the sink, watched the flames curl it into ash. It does not matter, because every night since, I feel the air shift. I see the reflection change, and I know the children were right. You do not end it. You only survive it. I took the job because it sounded easy and because I needed distance from the noise in my head. Night watch at a remote campground, tucked far into the mountains where your phone gives up and the road feels like it forgets to bring you back. The ranger station was smaller than my first apartment, a box with peeling paint, a cracked vinyl chair, a two-way radio that looked older than me, and a wall of keys that never seemed to fit any lock on the grounds. The boss handed me a laminated sheet and said the rules in a voice that sounded tired from saying them. Walk the loops every hour, check for live embers, radio in at midnight. I nodded like I had done it before. Truth was, I wanted a job where silence meant I was doing it right. The first nights gave me exactly that. The air smelled like pine sap and damp earth, and that faint, cleaner bite that clings to public bathrooms no matter how often someone scrubs. Crickets stitched the dark together, and the creek beyond the furthest loop whispered steady enough to feel like white noise. I learned the campground the way you learn a house, which steps creak, which doors stick, which sites keep their fires a little too proud of themselves. I walked with my flashlight held low, and tapped on metal rings with a stick so people would toss in another cup of water. I nodded to bleary parents carrying babies back from late feedings, and they nodded back like I was part of the furniture, which honestly felt nice. On the third night the sound dropped out, like somebody cut a wire. 1 second the crickets were a blanket, and the next they were gone, not fading, just gone. I was between the host site and the bathrooms when I noticed my own breath had turned into the loudest thing in the world. The pines were too still, every needle a held note. The air tasted like rain, even though the forecast had promised clear. I stood there waiting for the chorus to stitch itself back together. It did not. Silence should be empty, but this one had weight, like a wet coat hung across my shoulders. The motion light above the bathroom door snapped on so hard I blinked. White glare washed the concrete and pushed the soda machine hum into a higher pitch. I expected a raccoon. I walked slow and called out, because no one likes a flashlight in the face without a warning. No answer. I slid the beam across cinder block walls, across an empty doorway, across trees that leaned too close behind the building. The dark felt thick, like it soaked the light before it landed. The air smelled like cleaner and wet paper towels. Nothing moved, but the hair on my arms lifted, as if something had finished moving a second before I arrived. I turned toward the station, and a branch cracked to my right in the trees. not the quick snap a squirrel makes, a clean break, followed by the roll of weight stepping exactly where it wanted to step. I turned the beam and the sound stopped. I held it there and waited for the easy answers, the glint of a deer eye, the twitch of an ear, nothing. I lowered the light and started walking, and the sound came back, paced to my stride, not close and not far, just there. I told myself a camper was messing with me. People do that. A laugh behind the pines, a story earned at my expense. I kept my pace steady and tried to look bored, which is hard to do when your mouth forgets how to swallow. The radio on my belt gave a small hiss, like a quick breath, then settled into a soft static that almost made words if you leaned into it. I lifted it and gave the standard check and the boss wanted. No reply. I told myself batteries die even though I had swapped them before sunset. I clipped it back and felt the silence climb into the space the radio was supposed to fill. Back in the station, I did the kind of work you do when you are nervous and trying to look like you are not. Keys on crooked hooks, logbook open, block letters neat. 2 fires soaked and stirred, bathrooms clear, dumpsters latched. The metal fan in the corner ticked each time a bent blade kissed the guard. The room smelled like old coffee and sun-warmed plywood. I leaned my shoulder to the door and listened. Nothing. The nothing pressed back, which is a ridiculous sentence, but it is the only one that fits. I made myself go out again because the job required moving. I cut across the host site and headed for the family loop, because porch lights and soft voices make a place feel ordinary even when nothing else does. Halfway there, I swept my beam across a tent that should have been a bright green and watched it turn flat gray like wet stone. I stepped closer and the color snapped back. I laughed in a way that did not sound like a laugh. From behind me came a long exhale, not quite animal and not quite human, shaped like both in a way my brain did not like. I turned the beam, and the undergrowth looked wet, darker than the trunks, as if something had brushed along it and left a shine. I chose the wide gravel road back, no brush reaching in, sight lines from bend to bend. When I passed the bathrooms again, the motion light died the instant I stepped under it, as if it had been waiting on me. The sudden dark sat on my tongue. The bulb returned a heartbeat later, and for that heartbeat, the edges of the pool of light seemed to crawl outward like ants before the circle settled on the concrete. I did not stare long enough to see if it would do it again. My feet sounded too loud on the gravel. The forest did not answer. I locked the station door when I returned, which I never do that early. I told myself it was so I could finish paperwork without someone asking for ice at the exact moment my pen found a groove. The lock clicked loud in the small room. I wrote the hour and then wrote what I did not want to write. Forest silent, motion light cycling, footsteps pacing me in the trees, radio unreliable. I looked at the words until they felt like a stranger had set them down. Outside the window, the porch bulb threw a dull halo into the dust. Past it, the loops were a cutout of black shapes. A few sights away, another motion light blinked alive, then another farther down, little halos blooming and shrinking in a line, as if something moved just ahead of them, never inside them. I whispered wind even though the pines barely breathed. The radio hissed once and died. The crickets returned all at once, loud enough to make me flinch, and the sound felt wrong, too thick, like a recording stacked over itself. Somewhere in that noise, a limb cracked where I could not place it. I stood with my hand on the knob and understood 2 things at the same time. I did not want to open the door again, and I could not sit behind glass while something paced my loops. I stepped onto the porch and lifted the beam to the road. The dust showed a scuff where nothing had feet. The air held the cold of the creek, and the kind of waiting you only notice when you have stayed long enough to run out of excuses. The night stretched long, and the longer I sat in that station, the more I felt like the walls were breathing with me. Every time I exhaled, the plywood seemed to give a soft creak, and when I inhaled, the silence swelled back in as if it had been waiting. My hands could not sit still. I found myself spinning the ring of keys over and over, until the metal edges bit into my palm. The logbook sat open, the block letters staring back like they were written by someone else. I tried to convince myself that nothing had happened. Lights flicker, forests get quiet, Radios act up. It happens. But the excuses did not stick. Around 1 in the morning, I decided to make another loop. It felt worse, sitting in the station doing nothing, listening to the silence press harder, than it did to be outside with my flashlight shaking in my hand. At least outside I could move, and moving felt closer to being in control. I stepped out onto the porch, the bulb above the door buzzing faintly. The gravel road stretched pale under the beam of my light, and the trees leaned in like tall, waiting shapes. The first stretch was empty, nothing but my own footsteps grinding the gravel. The crickets had started again, their song loud enough to feel like it was being piped through speakers, but even that was strange. It sounded too full, too forced, like it had been layered over itself. The rhythm did not match the natural ebb and flow I was used to hearing. I tried to welcome it anyway. Any sound was better than the absence that had swallowed the forest earlier. When I reached the family loop, I noticed the first motion light snap on near the far bathhouse. A flood of pale light washed the empty dirt road. I expected to see a raccoon bolting across or the flash of a deer's tail, but nothing moved inside the pool of light. I waited for the bulb to click back off, but it stayed on, buzzing faintly. I shined my flashlight into the brush. The beam was swallowed quick, like the darkness behind the trees was thicker than it should have been. I walked closer, my boots crunching softly. That was when I heard it again. Footsteps pacing me just beyond the tree line, heavy enough to snap branches, slow enough to time with my own. I stopped. The sound stopped. I started walking again, faster this time. The steps followed, still steady, still keeping pace. My throat dried out, and I caught myself holding my breath. I whipped the flashlight toward the sound, my hand trembling, and the steps cut off sharp. The trees stared back blankly, the beam reaching only a few feet before being smothered. I muttered under my breath, telling myself it was a deer. A deer would pace, a deer would stop when I stopped. I almost laughed at the thought, but it came out choked and hollow. I kept walking, forcing my stride to stay even, pretending I did not hear the crack of wood each time whatever it was placed its weight. Halfway around the loop, a tent flap rustled near Site 8. My heart jumped until a tired voice whispered from inside, asking if it was safe to light a lantern. I cleared my throat and told them it was fine, my voice steadier than I felt. The relief of another human voice nearly buckled my knees. I stood outside their site longer than I needed to, answering their half-hearted questions, nodding to their yawns. When they finally ducked back inside their tent, I lingered another moment just to hear the faint shuffle of sleeping bags. The sound reminded me that I was not completely alone, even if I felt like it. On my way back toward the station, I noticed something strange near the open field. The dirt path was marked with footprints, clear in the dust where the gravel had thinned out. Two sets side by side, small enough to be kids or a couple walking together. They trailed off toward the trees, and beside them was a third set, larger. The stride was wider, the heel deeper, like someone heavier had been walking just behind. The prints stopped at the tree line and did not come back out. I crouched with my flashlight low to the ground, my stomach tightening. The prints were fresh. You could see the sharp edges where the dust still clung. My mind flipped through explanations, each one worse than the last. I told myself it was campers wandering too far. I told myself the larger set was mine from earlier, but my boots did not match the shape. These prints were too long, too narrow, like someone had pressed their weight onto the ground with pointed toes. The silence returned suddenly, the crickets cutting off in unison. I looked up fast, scanning the trees, the beam of my flashlight quivering. The field felt too open, the tree line too deep. Every shadow seemed to breathe. I forced myself to stand and back away, keeping the prints in view until the road curved and I lost sight of them. By the time I reached the station, my shirt was damp with sweat, sticking to my back. I locked the door again and set the flashlight on the counter, my hand shaking as I wrote the log entry, 1:15. Motion light triggered, footsteps pacing loop, prints found near field, larger than human. I stared at the words until they blurred. My pen slipped once, dragging a line across the page. I tried the radio again. Static hissed back at me, louder this time. broken by a sharp crackle. I tapped it against the counter and pressed the call button. "Station to base. Do you read?" A few seconds of silence. Then a faint voice threaded through the static, so low I almost missed it. "Do not follow the voices." I froze, the radio pressed tight to my ear. The static swallowed the words again, and no matter how many times I tried, the line stayed dead. My hand shook so badly I set the radio down hard enough to rattle the counter. My mouth was dry, my tongue heavy, but I whispered the words back to myself. "Do not follow the voices." The motion light outside the station snapped on, flooding the porch with pale glow. I stood, the tire iron from earlier already in my grip, and walked to the window. The porch was empty, the gravel road pale and quiet. No movement, no wind, just that buzzing glow. I backed away from the window, my shoulders brushing the filing cabinets I had pulled near the door. My legs wanted to run, but there was nowhere to run to. The forest pressed from every side. The station felt like a box made of glass. I picked up the flashlight again and kept it pointed at the door, the beam bright against the wood. My chest ached from breathing too fast, but I stayed locked in that spot, waiting for something to move, waiting for anything to prove I was not losing my grip. The clock ticked toward 1:30. I whispered to myself again, steadying my voice against the silence. "Do not follow the voices. Survive until daylight." I repeated the words until they felt like mine, even if I did not believe them yet. And outside, in the stretch of forest beyond the glow of the porch, the dark seemed to lean closer, listening. The clock in the station ticked louder than it should have, each second a nail tapping against the silence. I sat with the flashlight across my lap and the radio on the counter, staring at the door like I was waiting for it to breathe. My logbook lay open, but I could not bring myself to write. What would I even say now? That the forest itself felt alive, that the footprints in the dirt were too sharp, too deliberate, that the radio had spoken a warning in a voice I could not place. If I wrote those words, they would not look like mine anymore. They would look like they belonged to someone who had already lost the thread. I told myself I would wait until 2 before another loop, but when the minute hand landed there, I was still frozen in the chair. The silence outside was too complete. Even the porch light seemed dimmer, its circle of glow smaller than it had been before. My hands ached from clenching the tire iron. At 2:10, the motion light outside the bathrooms blinked on again, a sharp wash of pale in the distance. My chest tightened. I forced myself to stand. If I stayed inside too long, the fear would only grow teeth. At least outside I could pretend I had control. The gravel crunched soft under my boots as I walked the road. My flashlight beam cut a narrow tunnel ahead, the edges eaten quickly by the dark. Each step felt like an argument with my own body, my legs dragging against the weight of silence. By the time I reached the bathrooms, the light was still on, buzzing faintly. The concrete steps were bare. The doors hung closed. I swept my beam across the doorway, across the trees behind. For a second, I swore the shadows bent away from the light, like water recoiling from heat. I moved past fast, my ears straining for any sound. That was when I heard the first scream. It ripped through the forest, sharp and raw, not close but not far either. My chest locked tight. It was a man's voice, desperate, breaking on the edges. The sound carried long, as if the trees themselves had picked it up and thrown it farther. I spun, my flashlight cutting wild arcs, but the scream was already gone. A minute later, I saw the camper. He stumbled out from the trees near the family loop, his face pale under the light. His shirt clung to him with sweat, his hands shaking at his sides. His eyes caught mine, wide and hollow. He gasped out words between breaths. His girlfriend had gone to the bathroom 20 minutes ago, and she had not come back. He had searched the loop, the trail to the creek, everywhere. Nothing. I pulled my radio up fast, thumb on the call button. The static hissed back sharp enough to sting my ears. No voices, no warning this time, just dead air. The camper's voice cracked as he asked if I had seen her. I shook my head, my throat too tight to answer. Then it came, a scream that tore through the trees, longer and deeper than the first. It sounded human, but not right. There was something wet, guttural, stretched too far. The camper bolted before I could stop him. He yelled her name, his voice bouncing hard against the trunks. I ran after him, my flashlight beam leaping across the dirt road, but his stride was desperate, wild. By the time I caught up, we had reached the clearing near the open field. My beam cut across the ground and I froze. 2 sets of footprints in the dirt, side by side, smaller than mine, leading from the field into the tree line, and behind them, a third, larger. The stride longer, the weight heavier. My stomach turned cold. I shouted for him to stop, my voice breaking against the stillness. He did not listen. He kept running, his voice cracking as he called her name again and again. I chased him into the clearing, my chest heaving, and that was when the trees shifted. Branches bent like something heavy pressed through them. The camper's voice cracked once more before it fell silent. My flashlight beam swept across the prints again. The 2 small sets stopped sharp at the edge of the field. The larger set continued. I tried the radio again, desperation spilling into my voice, still static. I turned back toward the station, my boots dragging, but then the tree line groaned. A branch snapped loud, close enough to make me flinch. From the shadow of the trees, something stepped out. It was too tall, its limbs bent wrong, the angles sharp and broken, like a puppet with tangled strings, its head cocked to the side too far, as if the neck had already snapped once. My beam caught its eyes. They reflected pale and glassy, too wide, too still. My throat locked as it opened its mouth. What came out was not a growl, not a howl. It was the camper's girlfriend's voice, soft and desperate. "Help me." The words froze me. They were perfect, her tone, her cadence. The camper's breath hitched as he whispered her name. His whole body leaned toward the thing as if he believed, as if he could not see what I was seeing. My voice caught in my throat. I tried to scream for him to stop, but the sound barely left my mouth. The thing's head snapped forward, and in a blink it was on him. There was no space for me to move, no time to breathe. The flashlight beam jittered as I stumbled back. The camper vanished into the trees, swallowed with her voice echoing after him. The forest groaned shut behind them, branches knitting, silence falling like a curtain. I stood in the clearing alone, my chest hollow, my beam trembling against the empty dirt. The prints were still there, 3 sets pressed deep into the soil, ending where the trees began. The air felt thick, too heavy to breathe. My hands shook so badly the flashlight beam wavered across the trunks like a heartbeat. When I finally turned back toward the station, every step dragged like I was walking underwater. My ears strained for another voice, another scream, but the silence pressed harder, heavier. By the time I locked the station door behind me, my throat burned from holding back a sob. I sank into the chair, my arms weak, my breath shallow. The logbook sat open, waiting, but my hand could barely hold the pen. I wrote anyway, the words jagged. 2 campers missing. 3rd set of prints. Voice mimic. Warning confirmed. The ink smeared where my hand shook. I set the pen down and pressed both palms to my face, whispering to myself, "Do not follow the voices. Survive until daylight." The words felt thin, but they were the only thing I had left to hold. Outside, the porch light buzzed faintly. Beyond it, the dark pressed close, patient, waiting. And somewhere in that dark, a voice whispered low, too faint to be real, my name stretched in my mother's tone. The station felt like a box someone had set down in the middle of the forest, just to see what would happen to the person inside. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and wood, warmed too many summers by the sun. I sat with the flashlight clutched so tight my hand ached, the tire iron resting against my leg. The radio hissed quietly, a steady static that made the silence between each crackle feel deeper. I had written the last entry in the logbook with a hand that barely worked, the letters shaky, words jagged and desperate. My eyes kept drifting to it even though I did not want to look. The ink looked like it belonged to someone already fading out. I told myself not to go back out. 2 campers had disappeared in front of me, their voices stolen, their footprints ending where the trees swallowed them. Whatever lived out there was too fast, too practiced. My job had been to check fire pits and keep drunks from wandering into the creek. I had not signed up to stand against something that wore people's voices, like a mask. But sitting in the station made me feel like prey waiting in a cage. The windows reflected my pale face back at me, and every time I glanced at them, I half expected to see another reflection standing behind me. The clock on the wall read 3:20. I told myself if I could make it until 4, I would be fine. Sunrise would not be far behind. That thought almost held me steady until the trees outside groaned again, a deep sound like a giant leaning against them. Branches cracked sharp enough to echo through the glass. I stood before I knew I was standing, the flashlight beam bouncing off the filing cabinets I had dragged against the door. Then I heard it, a low voice, soft, desperate. At first it was too muffled to catch, but as I moved closer to the window, the words became clear. My name, whispered the way my mother used to when she was trying to wake me for school without scaring me. My stomach dropped. She lived hours away, and even if she had been at the campground, she would never sound like that. Too flat, too steady, every syllable falling the same way. I backed from the window, my throat tight, whispering the warning I had heard through the radio. Do not follow the voices. The whisper grew louder, shifting tone. Sometimes it was her voice, sometimes another, one that sounded like the camper's girlfriend, and then one that was not a voice I knew at all, low and guttural, like stone grinding. They layered together, overlapping until it was a chorus. Each one pressed against the glass as though they were inside the station already, their breath fogging the air. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the voices sank through bone, filling my chest. The radio on the counter crackled, and for a second I thought another warning was coming. Instead, what came through was the same chorus of voices, warped by static, whispering my name over and over. I slammed the volume down, but the words kept bleeding into the room, even with the knob twisted off. My own voice whispered back to me, repeating my name with a rhythm I did not recognize. I shoved the filing cabinets harder against the door, their metal scraping across the floor. I pulled down the blinds over the windows and wedged a chair against the handle. The whole time, the whisper followed, echoing from every corner of the small room. It was impossible to tell if it was outside or already in. I grabbed the logbook and wrote across the page in shaking letters. 3 voices, my name, inside. Writing it down felt like pinning it in place, giving me one anchor to hold against the flood. The clock ticked to 3:45. I crouched behind the counter, the flashlight beam aimed at the door, the tire iron heavy in my other hand. My breath came shallow and quick, every inhale sharp. The whisper changed then, shifting into words I did not want to hear. Help me, in the camper's girlfriend's voice. Open the door, in the trucker's voice I remembered from the gas station on my way here. You know me, in my own voice, drawn long, too calm. The air grew colder, enough that my breath came out faint and white. The vending machine in the corner groaned, its hum bending higher, then lower, like it was choking on the power. The bulbs overhead flickered, throwing quick shadows that twisted in directions they should not. For a moment, the shadow cast by my own body leaned the wrong way, stretching up the wall even though the light source was above me. My chest seized, and I forced my eyes to the floor. Do not acknowledge. Survive until daylight. Then came the knock. Soft at first, 3 taps against the door, steady, polite almost. My flashlight beam trembled as I raised it toward the wood. Another knock followed, louder, sharper, rattling the frame. Then another and another, until it was a pounding that shook the filing cabinets against the door. The chair wedged under the handle bounced with each hit. Dust sifted from the ceiling, catching in the beam of my flashlight. I pressed myself against the counter, whispering the words again and again. Do not follow the voices. Survive until daylight. The pounding stopped suddenly, so sudden it left my ears ringing. The silence after was worse, heavier, like the air was holding itself just outside the walls. I sat there for what felt like hours but could not have been more than minutes. The clock ticked to 3:55. My muscles ached from holding myself so tight, but I did not move. I could not. The whisper returned once more, softer, fading, my name spoken like a lullaby. It stretched longer, slower, until it melted back into the silence. When I finally dared to peek over the counter, the windows were black mirrors, reflecting my pale face and the cluttered station. The porch light outside flickered weakly. I stood on shaking legs and checked the locks again, even though I knew it would not matter. Whatever was out there did not need doors. I sat back on the stool and forced myself to write another log entry. 3 voices mimicking, door pounding, shadow wrong, still alive. The words steadied me, reminded me I was still here, still real. I stared at the page until the letters blurred and the clock ticked to 4. I whispered again, softer this time, almost a prayer. Just survive until daylight. My voice cracked on the last word, but it was enough. The station stayed silent. The pounding did not return, and though the voices lingered like smoke in my ears, they did not speak again. I told myself I had passed through something, some test or some game. If I could last the next 2 hours, the sun would burn it away. Outside, the forest waited. I could not see it, but I felt it pressing in from every side, a weight in the trees, a hunger in the silence. I gripped the flashlight tighter and sat with my back to the counter, my eyes locked on the door. The night was not over, but I was still breathing, and for now, that was enough. The hours between 4 and dawn were supposed to be the quietest, the dead hours when even animals give in to sleep, and the world takes a breath. I used to believe that back home, lying awake and watching the ceiling fan turn. But in that station, surrounded by trees that seemed to lean closer each time I blinked, the hours stretched long and alive. I sat with the flashlight beam fixed on the door, the tire iron balanced across my knees, and the radio turned low just in case it decided to speak again. The voices had gone silent after the pounding stopped, but I knew silence did not mean safety. It only meant waiting. At 4:15, the radio gave another crackle. My whole body jerked, and the tire iron slipped against the counter with a sharp clang. The hiss of static filled the room, then cut into something broken and warped, a message hidden under noise. I leaned close, my breath fogging the plastic casing. The words came through faint but clear enough to carve into me. Do not follow voices. Do not leave shelter. If it calls your name, do not answer. My stomach turned cold. Hearing it typed across the logbook was one thing. Hearing it spoken back through the static, like an order given straight to me, was another. The voice was not familiar, not the boss or any ranger I had met. It was distorted, rough around the edges, but it was human enough to anchor me. I clutched the radio tighter, whispering thank you, though I doubted anyone could hear. The comfort lasted seconds. From outside, the whisper started again, soft and close, shaping my name in my mother's tone. The exact same words, the exact same lilt, repeated steady like a metronome. I shut my eyes and pressed the radio against my chest, forcing the warning into my head. Do not follow voices. Do not answer. The whisper shifted to another tone, the camper's girlfriend now, then the man himself, then a voice that might have been mine if mine had been stretched thin. I pressed my palms to my ears, rocking in the chair, whispering no under my breath, until the sound faded. The station walls creaked like weight pressed against them, low and slow, traveling along the boards as if something circled just outside. I aimed the flashlight toward the nearest window, the blinds drawn tight, and the wood glowed pale under the beam. I half expected to see the outline of a hand pressing back through the slats. Nothing showed. But the creak traveled on, around the corner of the station, dragging itself toward the bathroom side. At 4:30, the motion light above the porch flickered and died. Not a pop, not a shatter, just gone, leaving the door swallowed in dark. I stood fast, the tire iron in one hand, the flashlight beam trembling across the wood. My chest ached from breathing too hard, but I could not slow it. I moved to the window and pulled the blind, just enough to peek out. Shapes moved in the tree line, not many at first, but enough to freeze me. Outlines too tall, too thin, bodies bent in angles no bone should hold. Their pale eyes caught the faint glow of the distant lot lights, blinking out as they flickered closer. The beam of my flashlight bounced against the glass, and every shape froze, their heads tilting toward the window in unison. My throat closed. I dropped the blind back fast, my hands shaking so badly the flashlight rattled against the sill. The radio hissed again, louder this time, almost urgent. I grabbed it with both hands, begging for another message, but only static poured through. Underneath the noise, I swore I heard breathing. Slow, heavy, wet, I dropped it back on the counter, the sound filling the room even with the volume low. A knock came at the back door, soft, patient. 3 raps spaced evenly, like someone who belonged here. I froze in place, the flashlight aimed low, the tire iron raised. Another knock came, louder, harder, rattling the cabinets braced against it. My name followed, whispered in my own voice this time. I bit down hard enough to taste copper, and whispered the warning over and over. Do not follow voices, do not answer. The knocks grew violent, pounding until dust sifted from the ceiling. The chair wedged under the handle bounced with each hit. I backed away, clutching the tire iron tight, my back pressed to the counter. The pounding stopped as suddenly as it started. My ears rang in the quiet. Then the sound shifted above me, a dragging scrape across the roof like nails pulled slow against the metal. It circled once, twice, then stopped over the bathrooms. I thought of the camper's girlfriend, the way her voice had been perfect when the thing in the trees called out. I thought of the 3rd set of footprints that did not return from the clearing. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might be sick. I crouched low behind the counter, the flashlight beam steady against the door, the words of the warning stuck in my throat. The vending machines hummed again, louder, vibrating the floor under my boots. The lights overhead flickered, casting shadows that bent the wrong way. For a moment, my own shadow leaned away from me, stretching long and thin across the ceiling. I dropped the flashlight and scrambled back, panting, my chest screaming for air. The shadow did not move with me. It stood still, its head cocked, arms bent at sharp angles. I shut my eyes, whispering do not acknowledge until my throat went raw. When I opened them again, the shadow was gone, only mine trembling small on the wall where it belonged. At 4:50, the whispers returned, softer this time, as if they knew I was wearing down. They called my name, not desperate now, but patient. They promised safety in my mother's voice, forgiveness in the camper's, comfort in my own. I gripped the tire iron until my palm blistered, repeating the warning like a prayer. Do not follow voices. Do not answer. The clock ticked louder, every second dragging like a weight. The first pale hint of dawn touched the far tree line, just enough to gray the edges of the dark. I staggered to the window and pulled the blind up an inch. The shapes in the trees swayed, their outlines flickering as the light reached them. One by one they turned, moving back into the forest, their limbs jerking at wrong angles. The silence followed them, heavy but loosening, until the first thin call of a bird cracked the air. I slumped back against the counter, my knees weak, my throat raw. The voices faded into the trees with the last of the dark, leaving only the hiss of the radio and the tick of the clock. I whispered the words again, not to steady myself now, but to mark that I had made it. Do not follow voices, do not answer, survive until daylight. And somehow I had. By the time the sun finally rose, I was sitting on the floor behind the counter with the tire iron across my knees and the flashlight long dead in my hand. My body ached from staying tense all night, every muscle locked like I had been holding my breath for hours. The logbook was still open on the counter, the last line written in shaky letters that barely looked like mine. Survive until daylight. I had written it 3 times, each one more desperate than the last, as though the act of writing it might make the sun come faster. When the first full light of morning pushed through the blinds, the station looked smaller, ordinary again. The shelves of maps and brochures, the empty coffee pot, the cracked vinyl chair in the corner, all of it looked harmless in the glow of the sun, but I did not feel harmless. My chest still hurt from holding my breath. My ears still rang with the echo of voices calling my name. I waited, watching the thin lines of sunlight creep further across the floor until they reached my boots. Only then did I believe it was real. I stood slowly, my legs trembling under me, and unlatched the door. The air outside was sharp and cold, damp with dew. For a moment, I just stood on the porch, squinting into the light. The forest that had pressed so close hours earlier now looked like any forest. Pine needles glistened, birds darted between branches, and the creek whispered faintly down the hill. I could almost believe I had imagined it all. Almost. The gravel road showed proof that I had not. Prints were still there in the dust, deep and sharp. 2 sets side by side, smaller than mine, ending at the tree line. Behind them, the larger set stretched further, the stride long and deliberate. I crouched and touched one with my fingertips. The edges were too clean, too heavy, like no boot had made them. They had not faded with the night. I followed the road through the family loop. Tents stood half collapsed, fabric shredded. A cooler lay overturned, its contents scattered. The fire pits were cold, filled with ash. Cars that had been parked at sites the day before were gone, not driven off. Their tracks were missing too, like the vehicles had never existed. The place looked abandoned, like campers had packed in a hurry, but I knew better. I had seen what had taken them. The clearing near the field was quiet in the daylight. The prints ended at the tree line, and beyond that, the forest looked untouched. No broken branches, no path carved by something massive. Just trees standing still in the sun. I wanted to step closer to see if the silence returned when I crossed that invisible line, but my stomach turned cold at the thought. I turned back fast, my boots crunching on gravel, my chest tight. Back at the station, I tried the radio again. For the first time all night, a voice came back clearly. The ranger on morning duty asked for a report, his tone bored, like he had been sipping coffee while waiting for me to call in. My throat locked for a second before I managed to answer. I told him the basics: 2 campers missing, the campground abandoned. I did not mention the voices or the shapes in the trees. I did not say anything about the pounding on the roof or the way my own shadow had turned against me. I already knew how it would sound. When he asked if I was staying on for the rest of the season, I said no. The word came out steady, calm, like I had practiced it. I told him I was done, that I would be leaving the keys and the logbook on the counter. He sighed like it was nothing new, another summer worker quitting after a week. He told me to write a note for the next person, and left it at that. I sat at the counter with the pen in my hand, staring at the open page. My last entry was still there in jagged ink. Survive until daylight. I thought about writing everything, about telling whoever came next, the truth of what waited in the trees. But the warning that had come through the radio echoed in my head. Do not follow voices. Do not answer. I wondered if writing too much would be another way of acknowledging them, another way of feeding whatever lived out there. In the end, I wrote only one line: be careful after midnight. I left the logbook open, the pen across the page, and stepped outside with the keys still jangling in my hand. I walked down the gravel road to where my car was parked. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, birds sang, the world looked right again. But I did not believe it, not fully. Every sound carried an edge, every shadow stretched too long. When I reached the lot, I unlocked the car and slid behind the wheel. The seat felt too soft, too normal, after the hard vinyl of the station chair. I started the engine, the hum loud and steady, grounding me. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The station sat small and square against the trees, its porch light still dark even in the morning sun. The forest behind it looked calm, ordinary. But I knew better. Somewhere in that silence, voices were waiting, patient. They had not gone anywhere. They had simply returned to listening. The road wound down the mountain, gravel turning to cracked pavement turning to smooth highway. With each mile, the air felt lighter, but the memory pressed heavier. I gripped the wheel until my hands ached, whispering the words that had carried me through. Do not follow voices. Do not answer. Survive until daylight. By the time I reached town, the world looked alive again. People walked sidewalks, cars honked, the smell of bread drifted from a bakery. Normal life pushed at the edges of the night I had lived, but it did not erase it. I knew what I had seen, what I had heard. I knew the forest was not empty. I did not go back. I never called the station again. Weeks later, when someone asked about my summer job, I shrugged and said it was too quiet for me, that I got bored. They laughed and said I had probably made the right choice. I nodded and changed the subject. But some nights, when the house grows still and the street outside is empty, I hear it again. Not loud, not close, just faint. A branch snapping where no weight should be. A whisper shaped like my name, flat and steady. I tell myself it is memory, nothing more. But I keep a lamp on by the bed, and I never open the window after midnight. I survived the campground. I survived until daylight. That is the ending I got, and I will take it. But the truth is simple, and it will never leave me. There was something moving between the trees, and it knew me. It still does. That Friday started like any other, the kind of day where I figured I would just kill a few hours babysitting, collect some easy cash, and maybe spend the next morning sleeping in. I did not question the phone call much. A co-worker from my after-school job at the grocery store had mentioned her aunt needed someone last minute, and my number was passed along. Babysitting was the sort of thing I had done enough that I did not think twice. Kids were kids. I expected board games, cartoons, maybe some begging for cookies before bedtime. Nothing unusual. The address she gave me was on the edge of town, in one of those neighborhoods where the houses looked just a little too new, a little too perfect. Every lawn manicured, every driveway spotless, but no sign of actual people living there. No basketball hoops, no chalk drawings on the sidewalk. It felt more like a display in a catalog than a real neighborhood. I told myself it was just the kind of place where families cared about appearances. The house itself stood out. It was bigger than I thought it would be, with clean white siding and windows that reflected the gray evening light like mirrors. Even before I knocked, something about it made me pause. It had no welcome mat, no potted plants, no seasonal wreath on the door. Just blank, sterile perfection. The door opened almost instantly, like they had been waiting right on the other side. The couple that greeted me smiled too quickly, too wide. They looked like parents in a commercial, attractive but generic, dressed neatly but without any detail that would stick in your memory. Their voices carried that polite tone that felt practiced. They did not introduce themselves, which I thought was strange. No names, no handshake, not even a casual question about my experience. The man simply gestured toward the staircase and said, "She's upstairs. Do not let her stay up past 9. His wife repeated the same line a second later, with that exact same pause before the word 9. I laughed nervously and said, of course, expecting some extra instructions, like allergies or bedtime routines. Instead, they just stood there smiling at me until I excused myself and headed upstairs. Their smiles never dropped. The upstairs hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, sharp and sterile. The carpet looked untouched, not a single mark from shoes. Every door was shut, but the one at the far end was cracked just slightly, and that is where I found her. She was sitting on her bed with a notebook in front of her, coloring with a red crayon. She did not look up when I entered, did not greet me, did not act like most kids who get excited when a babysitter shows up. I introduced myself and asked her name. She paused for a long moment, her crayon hovering over the paper, and then whispered, "I do not know yet." I tried to laugh, thinking maybe she was shy or playing a game. Her voice was so soft, though, it made my stomach tighten. Her room felt wrong in a way I could not pin down at first. Everything was too clean. The dresser drawers were empty when I peeked, the closet holding only a single dress, identical to the one she was wearing. The walls were bare, no posters, no school crafts taped up. Even the bed looked like it had been made for display rather than sleep, perfectly tucked corners and crisp sheets. I asked if she wanted me to read her a story before bed. That always worked with other kids. She turned her head slowly toward me, her face unreadable, and said, "That is not what they do." I asked what she meant, but she bent back over her drawing and said nothing else. As the evening dragged on, I tried to distract myself by watching television in the living room. The furniture looked brand new, stiff and uncomfortable. There were no remote controls on the coffee table, no magazines, no clutter of any kind. When I got up to get water from the kitchen, every cabinet I opened was empty. No plates, no cups, no food, just hollow shells of what a house was supposed to be. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe they had just moved in and had not unpacked yet. That would explain the emptiness. Still, the silence pressed down heavier than any house I had ever been in. Even in the suburbs, you expect to hear a clock ticking, a fridge humming, pipes creaking. Here, nothing. I checked on the girl around 8:30 and found her sitting in the same spot, staring at the corner of her room. The red crayon had rolled off the bed onto the carpet, but she had not moved to pick it up. Her little hands were folded neatly in her lap. When she finally glanced at me, her eyes were too wide, as if she had been startled awake. I asked if she was all right, and she just said, "It is almost time." That was the first moment I truly wanted to leave. But the thought of explaining that to the parents downstairs, parents who did not even tell me their names, froze me in place. I went back to the living room, sat on the stiff sofa, and watched the clock. The minutes crawled. I kept glancing at the empty kitchen doorway, at the darkened hallway, at the staircase that led up to that spotless room where the girl sat alone. At 8:55, I heard footsteps. Slow, measured, directly above me. The girl's room, then silence, then the sound of her bed creaking as if someone had sat down beside her. I forced myself to breathe, stood up, and took one step toward the stairs. The house groaned faintly, as if settling, but it sounded more like a breath. I stopped at the foot of the stairs, straining to hear, my whole body tensed. And then the silence returned, thick and unnatural. The clock on the wall ticked over to 9. The front door opened. The sound of the front door opening at exactly 9 stopped me cold. I had been staring at the clock as the minute hand hit the mark, willing myself to go upstairs, to check on the girl, to make sure she was not sitting with whoever or whatever had made her bed creak. But the door opening froze me in place. I expected to hear the parents calling out, maybe apologizing for being late, maybe asking how everything had gone. Instead, I heard nothing, just the faint shuffle of footsteps, slow and even, like the rhythm of a metronome. I stood in the living room, clutching the strap of my bag like a lifeline, listening as the steps moved through the hallway and toward the stairs. My throat went dry. Something about the sound of those steps was wrong, too steady, too rehearsed. When they finally came into view, I felt the breath leave me. The parents stood side by side in the hallway, smiling that same stretched smile they had greeted me with earlier. But they looked different now. Their clothes had changed. The father wore a pressed shirt I had not seen before, the fabric still damp, clinging to his skin. The mother's hair was wet, drops of water darkening the shoulders of her blouse. It was as if they had taken showers somewhere and dressed in fresh clothes before stepping back into their own house. They spoke in unison, their voices flat and mechanical. Did she behave? My heart hammered. I nodded quickly, unable to find words. Their smiles widened, almost splitting their faces. The mother stepped forward and pressed a folded bill into my palm, her skin cold against mine. Then, without another word, she turned and climbed the stairs. The father did not move. He just stared at me, unblinking, his expression frozen in that too-wide grin. I stammered something like, "Thank you," and hurried toward the door, but his eyes followed me the entire way, not turning his head, not blinking, just tracking me until I slipped outside. The night air hit me like a slap. I half expected to see the house vanish behind me as soon as I stepped onto the driveway, but when I glanced back, it was still there, glowing faintly under the streetlight. I drove away faster than I should have, not daring to check the rearview mirror until I was several streets over. When I finally looked, my stomach lurched. The back seat of my car was dark, empty, but for a split second I thought I saw a pale face reflected in the window glass. By the time I blinked, it was gone. I did not sleep much that night. My mind spun in circles, replaying every detail. The girl's whisper, the empty drawers, the parents' wet clothes, the unison voices. None of it fit together. It felt staged, but for what? The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had just been an odd family. People are strange. Some parents have weird routines. Maybe they really had been out swimming or something before coming home. Maybe the girl was shy and imaginative. But the explanations did not stick. They slid right off the memory of those blank eyes and that brittle smile. At work that afternoon, I mentioned the babysitting job to my coworker, more to reassure myself it had been real. I said something like, "Hey, thanks for passing my number to your aunt. That house was huge." She frowned. "My aunt? What are you talking about?" I laughed awkwardly, waiting for her to remember, but she just shook her head. "I do not have an aunt around here. I never passed your number to anyone." The pit in my stomach opened wide. I pushed, asking if maybe someone else in her family had called, but she was adamant. She had no idea what I was talking about. That evening, unable to shake the unease, I drove past the address again. I wanted proof, something concrete to tether the memory to reality. What I found made my skin crawl. The house looked abandoned. The yard was overgrown with weeds, the paint on the siding peeling, the windows cracked and dark. A "for sale" sign leaned crooked in the front yard, its edges weathered. It looked like no one had lived there in years. But I had been inside the night before. I had walked on its spotless carpet, opened its empty drawers, spoken to its child. I pulled over and sat there with the engine running, staring at the house until my hands shook on the steering wheel. My brain fought itself, one part screaming that I had imagined it, the other replaying the sound of the girl whispering, "It is almost time." When I finally drove away, I noticed something crumpled on the passenger seat. My stomach turned when I recognized the folded bill the mother had pressed into my hand. I had left it on my desk at home that morning. Somehow, it was back in the car with me. I forced myself to unfold it. At first, in the dim light of the street lamp outside, I thought it was a normal 20, but the paper felt brittle, the color faded. In the daylight, I would see the truth, but even then, I noticed the date stamped faintly on it, 1974. And worse, across the bill, scrawled in shaky pen, were the words, "Do not let her stay up past 9. I dropped it onto the seat and gripped the wheel tighter, fighting the urge to scream. That night, I barely moved from my bed, too afraid to check the windows, too afraid to turn off the light. Every creak of the house sent a jolt through me. My phone buzzed around midnight, an unknown number lighting up the screen. I did not answer, but the message came through anyway, just one sentence, written plainly. "We need you again this Friday, same time." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I stared at the words until they blurred, until the glow of the screen burned into my eyes. I thought about blocking the number, about throwing the phone across the room, but deep down I knew it would not matter. They had found me once. They could find me again. And as I lay there, listening to the silence press down around me, I realized the part that scared me most was not the house, or the girl, or even the parents' brittle smiles. It was that some part of me, buried deep and irrational, already knew I would go back. I carried that message around in my head all week like a splinter I could not dig out. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected another text, some new instruction, some reminder. None came, just the single line, "We need you again this Friday, same time." I told myself I would ignore it, that it was a prank, that it had to be. But no matter how many times I tried to reason it away, the memory of that girl whispering in her spotless room, the way her parents' smiles seemed stretched thin over something else. The brittle bill from 1974. None of it let me go. Friday arrived faster than I thought it would. I spent the day in a haze, distracted, making mistakes at work. My coworker asked if I was feeling all right, and I almost told her everything, but the words caught in my throat. I already knew what she would say. She would deny it again, swear she had never given my number to anyone. That evening, as the sun slipped down, I found myself in the car, driving toward the edge of town without consciously deciding to. It was like something inside me had already chosen, and I was just catching up. The neighborhood was darker this time, more lifeless. The houses sat in neat rows, but none of them had lights on. No cars in the driveways, no porch lamps, no movement behind the windows. The whole place felt staged again, but emptier now, like a movie set after the crew had left. When I turned onto the street where the house stood, my chest tightened. Last time it had looked lived in, spotless and sterile but real enough. Now it looked like it had when I drove past the second time, abandoned. The yard overgrown, the siding cracked, the windows dark and broken. A for sale sign leaned against the porch, bent and rusting. I should have turned around. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, to go home, to lock my own doors and never answer unknown numbers again. But I parked at the curb. I got out. My feet crunched on the gravel as though pulled by something heavier than choice. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air hit me first. Cold, damp, carrying the smell of mildew and rot. The interior did not match what I had seen before. No spotless carpet, no polished furniture. Instead, the living room was empty, the floorboards warped and broken, cobwebs hung thick in the corners. I told myself I was losing it, that my memory had filled in details that were never there. But then I looked down at the floor. In the dust and grime, faint footprints led across the room toward the stairs. Small footprints, too small to be an adult's. I followed them, each step heavier than the last. The upstairs hallway was darker, the air even colder. The doors hung open now, but only one room seemed to have shape. The last door on the left. Her room. The footprints led directly inside. When I stepped through the doorway, my stomach turned. The room was exactly as I had seen it before. Spotless. Bed neatly made. Dresser drawers empty. Closet holding one dress. Even the faint smell of lemon cleaner lingered. And there she was, sitting on the bed, coloring with that same red crayon. She looked up at me this time, her eyes too wide, too dark, like they were absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. "You came back," she whispered. I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry. Finally I managed. "What is your name?" She tilted her head, just slightly. "I still do not know yet." The crayon rolled from her hand and dropped soundlessly to the floor. She folded her hands in her lap and stared at the corner of the room, just as she had before. "They are early again," she said softly. A chill crawled down my spine. I glanced at the window and saw it. A pale face pressed against the glass, grinning, the skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. We were on the second floor. No ladder, no balcony, nothing but empty air beneath that window. I stumbled back, but when I blinked, the face was gone. The girl's eyes followed something invisible across the room. She nodded faintly, as though acknowledging someone I could not see. Then she whispered, "You should go before they decide." My legs moved before my brain did. I bolted from the room, down the stairs and out the door. The night air was thick with the smell of damp earth, of mildew and rot, of something old. My car sat exactly where I had left it, but the windows were fogged from the inside. I pulled the door open and froze. On the passenger seat lay another folded bill. My hands shook as I picked it up. It was brittle, yellowed with age. This time, it was a 5, dated 1969. The same shaky handwriting scrawled across it. "Do not let her stay up past 9. I threw it onto the floor of the car and slammed the door shut. My hands gripped the wheel so tight they ached, but I could not bring myself to start the engine. Then my phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. The message read, "Thank you. She behaved tonight." My heart sank. My mind spun with questions I could not let form fully. Behaved for who? For what? The neighborhood behind me looked darker now, as if the street lights themselves had gone out. My reflection in the windshield was pale and shaking. Finally, I started the engine and drove away, refusing to look back. But the entire drive home, I swore I could see movement in the corner of my rearview mirror. A pale face, grinning, watching, waiting. When I got home, I locked the doors, pulled the curtains tight, and shoved the bills into the back of my desk drawer. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the house, every car passing outside, every shadow shifting on the wall jolted me awake again. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up and sat in the dark with my phone in my hands, waiting. Another message came, just 3 words: "We will call." I told myself I would not answer if they called, that I would block the number, burn the bills, and never drive near that neighborhood again. But the more I tried to resist, the stronger the pull became. It was like gravity, drawing me back to that hollow house and the girl who whispered that she did not know her own name. The days blurred together. At work, I jumped whenever the phone rang. At home, I kept my curtains closed tight, though I often caught myself staring at the thin slits of light, waiting for a pale face to appear outside. The bills sat in the drawer of my desk, but I could not bring myself to throw them away. I would check them at night, unfolding the brittle paper, tracing the shaky handwriting with my finger. The words never changed. "Do not let her stay up past 9. By Thursday, I had convinced myself I was imagining it all. Sleep deprivation, stress, a prank that had wormed its way too deep into my mind. Then Friday came. The call arrived just after sunset. Not a text this time, but an actual call. The same unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. The voice on the other end was flat, genderless, strangely distorted, as if 2 people were speaking at once. "We need you again, same time." My throat went dry. I managed to whisper, "No." Silence stretched on the line for several seconds, too long, like they were deciding how to respond. Then the voice said, "It is not a choice." The line went dead. I sat frozen with the phone pressed to my ear, the words echoing in my head. It is not a choice. That night, I did not drive to the house. I locked every door, pushed furniture against the windows, and sat on my bed with a kitchen knife clutched in my hand. My dog whined at the door, restless, unsettled. At exactly 9, the knocking started. Not at my front door, not at the windows, but from inside the walls. 3 deliberate knocks, muffled through plaster and wood. I pressed my back against the headboard, heart racing, knife trembling in my grip. The knocking moved, slow and steady, from one wall to another, circling me, always in sets of 3, always patient. I covered my ears and squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them again, my phone buzzed. A new message. "She is awake. You were supposed to help." My stomach twisted. The knife slipped from my hands. The knocking stopped. Silence filled the house again, heavier than before. The next morning, I drove past the address again. I told myself I would see the same abandoned shell of a house, broken windows and peeling paint. But when I turned the corner, my breath caught. The house was whole again, spotless siding, perfectly trimmed grass, curtains drawn neatly across each glowing window, as if the decay had been nothing more than a dream. My car idled at the curb. I stared at the front door, at the clean white paint, waiting. The door opened slowly. The mother stood there, smiling too wide, her hair dry and neat this time. She raised her hand in a small wave, as if she had known I would come. I slammed the car into gear and sped away, refusing to look back. But later that evening, I found something tucked under my windshield wiper. Another bill, this one a 10, dated 1981. The words scrawled across it, "Do not let her stay up past 9. I could not breathe. I shoved the bill into my pocket and went inside, locking the door behind me. I paced the living room until my legs ached. Finally, I called my coworker. I had avoided telling her the full truth, afraid she would think I had lost it, but I could not hold it in anymore. I told her everything. The calls, the bills, the girl, the parents, the house that shifted between lived in and abandoned. She listened quietly, then said something that chilled me. "You know, there used to be a family that lived on that street. My mom told me about it once. Said they were strange, kept to themselves. People whispered about them. Then one night, they all just vanished. No one ever figured out where they went." I asked when that was. She hesitated before answering. "Sometime in the 70s, I think. The Bills. 1974, 1969. Each one older than I was. Each one carrying the same message." I asked her if she knew their name, but she said she did not remember, just that people said they were not right. That night, I dreamed of the girl. She sat on her bed with her red crayon, staring at me with wide, dark eyes. Only this time, she spoke clearly. "You belong to them now. You cannot stop it." I woke with sweat soaking my sheets, my chest tight, my throat dry. When I reached for my phone, there was a new message waiting. "You are late." The house sat in my mind like a weight. The girl's whisper, the pale face at the window, the parents' brittle smiles. I knew I should run, leave town, forget it all. But deep down, I felt it. I was already bound. The next evening, I found another folded bill slipped under my apartment door. A 20 this time. Not brittle like the others, but fresh and crisp. It had today's date written across it in the same shaky handwriting. "Do not let her stay up past 9. My hands shook as I unfolded it. My heart pounded. The room felt colder, the shadows darker. The message had changed. Now it was not just a warning. It was a command. I carried the fresh 20 around all day, unable to throw it away. The old brittle bills were easy enough to hide in a drawer, to pretend they were just relics from someone else's life. But this one was different. This one was new, warm from the printer, crisp under my fingers, with today's date scrawled across it in that same unsteady hand. Every time I looked at it, my stomach tightened. Whoever or whatever had left it knew where I lived. They had slipped it under my door without a sound. The thought made my skin crawl. I imagined pale faces pressed against the glass of my windows while I slept, hands sliding envelopes through cracks, waiting just out of sight. That night, I dreamed of the girl again. She was sitting on her bed, her red crayon worn down to a stub, the pages in front of her filled with jagged circles. She looked up at me, her wide, dark eyes unblinking, and whispered, "They will not wait much longer. You have to decide." I woke gasping, the 20 clutched in my hand. I could not even remember picking it up. Saturday morning, I drove out to the edge of town again. I told myself I was just curious, that I needed to see the house in daylight to prove to myself it was abandoned, rotting, nothing more than a husk. But when I turned onto the street, my heart sank. The house was perfect again. White siding gleaming, grass trimmed, curtains drawn. A car sat in the driveway this time, an old sedan that looked polished to a shine. The front door stood slightly open, as though inviting me in. I parked a block away, hands gripping the wheel. I told myself not to go closer, that I was done with this, but my body betrayed me. Step by step, I moved toward the house, up the cracked sidewalk that looked freshly scrubbed, onto the porch that no longer sagged under its own weight. Inside, the air smelled of lemon cleaner again. The furniture was in place. The cabinets, when I opened them, were still empty, but not broken anymore. It was like stepping into a stage set that someone had carefully reconstructed just for me. I heard movement upstairs. Light footsteps. Too light to be the parents. The girl. I found her in her room, exactly where she had been before, sitting on the bed with her notebook and her red crayon. She did not look up as I entered. Her hand moved in small, deliberate strokes across the page. I forced myself to ask, "What are you drawing?" She paused, then slowly turned the notebook toward me. My stomach flipped. The page was filled with shaky outlines of faces, wide grins, hollow eyes. Dozens of them crammed onto the paper until they bled into one another. She whispered, "They want you to stay." The words chilled me more than the drawing. I stepped back, shaking my head. I am not staying here. Her lips twitched as if she wanted to smile, but it never formed. You already are. The door creaked behind me. I spun, but no one was there. Just the hallway, dark and still. When I turned back, the notebook was gone, and the girl was staring at the corner of the room again. They are here, she whispered. The window glass shifted, and for a moment I saw them. Pale faces pressed against the pane, grinning, too many to count. Their eyes were blank voids, and their teeth were long and sharp. They did not move, just watched, waiting. I stumbled out of the room, down the stairs, and through the front door. The air outside felt no safer, heavier with the sense of being observed. I could feel them behind every window as I hurried down the street. When I got home, another message was waiting on my phone. Friday again. Do not be late. I deleted it without replying, but it did not matter. The next day, a bill appeared on my kitchen counter, though I had not left the door unlocked. A 50 this time, dated 1989. The handwriting across it read, "She must not stay up past 9. I shoved it into the drawer with the others, but my hands shook. The pile was growing, each bill older, more fragile, except for the new ones, which always bore the date of the day they appeared. I tried to research the family, digging through old newspapers at the library. What I found only deepened my unease. There had been reports of a missing family in that neighborhood in the 1970s, but the articles were vague. One mentioned 2 children, but only described one in detail. A girl, around 8 years old, with dark eyes and light hair. No name was listed. No resolution was ever found. One article contained a single disturbing line. Neighbors recall strange routines, the family repeating the same sentences, as if rehearsed. The words echoed in my head. Did she behave? The librarian glanced at me strangely as I photocopied the article. She asked why I was so interested in that old case. I lied and said it was for a school project. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment too long before she nodded. That night, I set the photocopy on my desk beside the stack of bills. I stared at them until the words blurred. My phone buzzed again around 9. Another message. She is waiting. I turned the phone off and shoved it under a pillow. But the knock started again, this time from the ceiling. 3 deliberate raps, spaced evenly, then silence, then again, closer. I did not sleep. When morning came, I checked my desk. The photocopy was gone. In its place was another bill, this one a 1, dated 1963. The handwriting was the same. Do not let her stay up past 9. My hands shook as I held it. They were closing in. They knew everything I touched, everything I tried to uncover. And I realized then that I had no choice. They were not asking anymore. They were telling. Friday was coming, and they would not let me ignore it. Friday arrived like a storm cloud I could not avoid. Every hour dragged, each one heavier than the last, and by evening my nerves were frayed to nothing. I told myself 100 times that I would not go, that I would lock myself inside and let them rage against the walls if they wanted. But as the sun set, I found myself standing by the door with my keys in my hand, the weight of the bills pressing on me from the drawer where I had hidden them. It was not choice anymore. It never had been. The drive out to the edge of town felt like moving through a dream, every street empty, every light too dim. When I reached the neighborhood, my stomach clenched. The house was glowing with warm light, curtains drawn, grass trimmed, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. The old sedan sat in the driveway again, gleaming under the street lamp. The front door was already ajar. I stepped inside. The smell of lemon cleaner hit me instantly, sharp and sterile. The furniture was arranged exactly as before, everything perfect and spotless. The air hummed with stillness, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The parents appeared in the hallway, smiling with those stretched faces. They spoke in unison, their voices flat and rehearsed. She is upstairs. Do not let her stay up past 9. I opened my mouth to protest, to say I was done, but no sound came. My throat felt locked. The mother pressed another bill into my palm, My fingers closed around it on their own. I climbed the stairs. Her room was waiting, spotless, bed perfectly made, closet holding one dress, dresser empty, and there she was, sitting on the bed with her notebook and the red crayon, as if not a single second had passed since I first met her. She looked up at me this time, her wide eyes steady. "You came back," she said. I forced myself to whisper, "Who are you?" She tilted her head. "I do not know yet." Then, after a pause, she added, "But I know you." The red crayon dropped from her fingers and rolled across the carpet. She folded her hands in her lap and stared at the corner of the room. "They are here." The window glass shimmered. Faces pressed against it again, pale and grinning, teeth sharp, eyes blank. Too many to count. My chest tightened as I backed toward the door, but her voice stopped me. "If I stay up past 9, they come inside," she whispered. The clock on her wall ticked toward 9. I felt it like a drumbeat in my chest. "What happens if they come inside?" I asked, my voice shaking. She finally looked at me directly. "Then it is not me anymore." I froze, watching her small hands clench together, her body trembling like she was fighting something unseen. The air grew colder, the light dimmed. The house groaned, a sound like breath moving through its walls. The clock struck 9. The door slammed behind me. The girl's eyes widened, her lips parting in a silent cry. She began to change. Her face stretched, her eyes darkened, her body contorted as if something was trying to push through her skin. The pale faces at the window pressed closer, their grins wider. I ran forward without thinking, grabbing her small shoulders, shaking her. "Stay awake. Do not let them in." Her mouth opened and a sound came out, not a scream, but a chorus of voices, layered and echoing, too many to belong to one child. My ears rang, my vision swam, but I held on. The parents' voices rose from the hallway, speaking in perfect unison. She must not stay up past 9. The girl's body jolted, then went limp in my arms. The voices cut off. The house went silent. The faces at the window melted away into the dark. I laid her gently back on the bed. Her chest rose and fell in slow, steady breaths. Her eyes fluttered open, softer now, human again. "You kept me," she whispered. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. The parents appeared in the doorway, their smiles stretched but steadier now. The father spoke first, his voice strangely calm. "You did well." The mother nodded, pressing her hands together. "She behaved." I shook my head, my voice finally breaking free. "What is she? What are you?" They looked at one another, their smiles never fading. "We are what is left," the father said. The mother added, "And now, so are you." Before I could speak again, the girl's voice cut through the air. "You should go." I backed out of the room, down the stairs and out the front door. The night air hit me, cool and damp, but I could still hear her whisper in my head, "You should go." When I reached my car, another bill was waiting on the driver's seat. I picked it up with shaking hands. 100, crisp and fresh. Across it, in the same shaky handwriting, were the words, "You did well." I drove home in silence, the bill heavy in my pocket. That night, for the first time in weeks, there was no knocking, no messages, no pale faces at my windows. The house was quiet, but I knew it was not over. The bills still sat in my drawer, brittle with age. The girl's wide eyes lingered in my mind. The parents rehearsed smiles, their voices in unison. All of it stayed with me, and though the silence of my own apartment felt safe, I could not shake the truth. They had given me a role. I had played it, and now I belonged to them, whether I wanted to or not. When I checked my phone the next morning, there was no new message, just the old ones, sitting there like scars. But at the bottom of the screen, one new notification blinked, a calendar invite. It read, "Friday, same time." I stared at it until my vision blurred, the weight of it sinking into me. This was not an ending. It was a routine, a script I had stepped into, one I could never step out of. Still, for the first time, I understood. I was not their babysitter. I was theirs. It showed up on a Thursday, late morning. I was working from home, half answering emails, half trying not to fall into a YouTube hole. It was one of those cold, gray days where everything feels like it's moving half a second slower than usual. The knock didn't even sound like a knock. It was more like someone thumped their fist against the door once, then walked away. I figured it was a delivery, so I opened the door and looked around. Nobody there. Just a small package sitting dead center on the welcome mat. No box markings, no Amazon tape, no shipping label. Just plain brown cardboard sealed with duct tape, with a bright red, fragile sticker slapped on the top like an afterthought. I didn't think much of it at first. I get deliveries all the time, work stuff. Junk I forgot I ordered, the usual. But something about this one bugged me right away. I picked it up and turned it over. No address, no sender, no postage. Not even my name. Just nothing. I looked up and down the street like maybe someone was pranking me, but everything was normal. Trash bins at the curb, leaves blowing across the sidewalk, no one in sight. I brought the box inside and set it on the kitchen table, sat down, stared at it for a minute. That's when the unease started creeping in, not panic or fear, just that off-center feeling you get when you walk into a room and forget why you're there, something not fitting into the pattern. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a steak knife and sliced through the duct tape. Inside, nestled in crumpled brown paper, were two things. A black burner phone, still in its shrink wrap, and a flash drive. That's it. No note, no instructions, just those two items sitting there like a puzzle I didn't ask for. I took the flash drive out first. Standard USB, no markings. I plugged it into my laptop, more out of habit than logic. I think I was expecting some kind of weird spam file or a dumb prank video. Maybe someone in my building accidentally dropped it at the wrong unit. What opened was a folder, no name. Inside were video files, dozens of them. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at. Grainy, jittery footage. Some of it shot from high angles, like security cameras. Others were handheld. Phones, probably. Or dash cams. I clicked on the first one. A woman walking home from work. She had a tote bag, white sneakers, AirPods in. The camera followed her from a distance, staying behind trees and cars. At one point, she stopped to look at her phone, and the camera zoomed in, shaky, breathing audible in the background. My stomach turned a little. I clicked another. A different woman, this time at the gym. The angle was from behind a cracked locker door. She was tying her hair up. The camera lingered, moved closer. The next video showed someone's kitchen window at night, interior light on, a woman inside making tea. The camera sat still in the dark, filming through the glass. I opened 3 more files in quick succession. Different women, different places. Always the same thing. Someone watching. Not once did the women look at the camera. They never knew. I sat back, suddenly aware of how quiet the house was. It didn't feel like a prank anymore. I ejected the drive and shoved it back into the box. My hands felt weird, tingly, like they'd touched something hot, and the nerves were just starting to register it. I grabbed the burner phone next. Still in its plastic, brand new. I didn't open it. Not then. Instead, I called the non-emergency police line. I told them I received a suspicious package, that it contained possible evidence of stalking, maybe even a crime. They told me someone would follow up. I hung up and stared at the phone again. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw one of those women from the videos looking over her shoulder, not because she knew she was being watched, but because she felt it. That stayed with me. The next morning, no one had called me back. By noon, I called the station again, got transferred twice, left a voicemail, never heard anything. That night, around 8:30, the burner phone rang. It was sitting on my desk, still sealed. The sound made me jump. I stared at it until the ringing stopped. It started again immediately. So I answered. There was a soft click, followed by a second of dead silence, then a voice. Distorted, filtered, hollow. You opened it, the voice said. It wasn't a question. That means it's yours now. Click. Dead line. No number, just unknown. I didn't sleep at all that night. I checked all the locks twice, left the porch light on. Every time a car drove past, I peeked through the blinds. Still nothing. But by the next morning, I started feeling watched, not from inside the house, outside. Like if I opened the door too fast, someone would be standing on the sidewalk pretending to tie their shoe, or if I stepped onto the porch, a camera shutter would click somewhere behind a parked car. Paranoia, maybe, but that doesn't mean it's not real. 2 days later, I saw the van. White, no logo, idling across the street, lights off. The windows were tinted. I couldn't see the driver. It sat there for about 10 minutes. Then it rolled away. I watched it disappear down the road, didn't chase it, didn't call anyone, just stood there at the window, holding the curtain edge like it was a shield. Later that night, I went back through the drive. I looked at the footage frame by frame, faces, locations. One of the gym clips had a mirror in the background. I zoomed in. And there it was. The same white van, parked outside, partially obscured by trees. It wasn't just following them. It had been part of the story the whole time. I spent the next morning trying to convince myself it wasn't the same van. White vans are everywhere. Delivery drivers, contractors, maintenance crews. It didn't have to be the van, but that logic didn't stick for long. I kept flashing back to the video, that grainy reflection in the gym mirror. Same shape, same taillight sticker on the left corner. And it wasn't just that it looked the same, it was the way it parked, the way it sat. Lights off, engine running, facing my house. I didn't go outside that day, not even to grab the mail. I called the police again. This time I didn't go through the non-emergency line. I told them everything: the package, the burner phone, the drive, the van. They said an officer would swing by. I waited 3 hours. No one came. When I called again, they said my report had been noted. but there wasn't much they could do unless I had something actionable. No license plate, no footage, no confirmed threat. Just a gut feeling. I asked if they wanted the burner phone or the drive. They said, "You can turn it in if you'd like, but we can't guarantee follow-up." It didn't feel like a brush-off exactly, just bureaucracy doing what bureaucracy does, taking the teeth out of urgency. That night, I tried to distract myself, put on a movie, ordered takeout, kept the lights low, but I kept checking the window every 10 minutes, scanning the street for headlights. Nothing. Until just after 11, when I went to brush my teeth and noticed something strange. My bathroom window doesn't face the front of the house. It faces the side, toward the alley. There's a narrow gap between my place and the neighbors, maybe 10 feet wide. Just enough space for trash bins and weeds. As I leaned over the sink, I saw movement. I froze, toothbrush in hand. Someone was standing in the alley, just standing there. They weren't looking into my window. They were facing the other way, toward the back fence. But the posture was too stiff to be casual. No phone, no smoke, no motion at all. Just stillness. Like they were waiting for something. I shut the light off, then peeked again. Gone. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. I didn't sleep that night, again. The next day, I started making copies of the videos. I bought a fresh pack of drives, transferred everything from the original one, labeled each folder with the dates and timestamps that were embedded in the file data. I figured if anything happened to me, I needed someone else to have this, something to prove I didn't make it up. I emailed a copy to myself, sent another to a burner Gmail account I made that morning, hid one of the physical drives inside an empty cereal box in the back of the pantry. Paranoid? Probably. But it gave me some illusion of control, and that was better than nothing. Later that night, the burner phone rang again. It had been silent since that first call. I'd left it in a drawer, battery still full. When the screen lit up, it was the same as before, unknown number. No caller ID. No ringtone, just vibration. I let it buzz for a while, didn't want to answer. But eventually, I did. This time the voice was quieter, same distortion, but almost tired. "You're still watching," it said. I didn't respond. The voice waited, then said, "You shouldn't be." And then it hung up. I stood there holding the phone like it was radioactive. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't sit in Zoom meetings pretending I wasn't unraveling. I didn't even log on, just sent a vague email about feeling unwell. Instead, I drove. Nowhere in particular, just away. I put on sunglasses and a hoodie and took back roads out of town. Every time I passed a white van, I felt my pulse jump. I ended up at a rest stop about an hour outside the city, sat there for 20 minutes with the windows up, locked, engine running. Then I realized I was being watched again. Not by a person, by a camera. Mounted on the corner of the rest stop building, angled right at me. I know it sounds ridiculous. Of course I was being watched. It's a public area. Security is everywhere these days. But something about that moment hit me differently. For the first time since this started, I wasn't just afraid of whoever had sent the package. I was afraid of being seen with it, of being connected to it. Because what if someone had followed me? What if a camera somewhere picked up footage of me carrying that box inside my house? What if someone traced it back, scrubbed it to make it look like I was the one recording those women? That's when I finally understood what the voice meant. You opened it. That means it's yours now. I wasn't just a recipient. I was now part of the chain. When I got home, I checked every inch of my place. Not just the locks, but the vents, the smoke detector, the potted plants. I even unscrewed a light switch plate just to make sure nothing was behind it. No cameras, no wires. But when I turned on my computer to check the burner Gmail, the inbox had a new message. No subject, no body, just a link. I stared at it for a long time. Clicked it. It led to a private live stream, one that had already been playing for nearly 2 hours. It was footage of someone's apartment. Not mine, but familiar. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, working at her kitchen table, drinking coffee, typing something into her laptop, completely unaware. The stream had no chat, no name, no watermark. I refreshed the page, it kept going. I watched for a few more minutes, heart pounding. And then she looked up. Not at the camera, just into the room, like she'd heard something. She stood up, walked to her front door, looked through the peephole. She stayed there for a while. Then she walked back, sat down, and shut her laptop. The feed cut to black, and my screen stayed that way. No rewind, no playback. Just blank. I shut the laptop and sat in the dark. For a long time I didn't move. I just sat there with my hands on my knees, staring at nothing, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do now, what anyone would do. Because the truth was, I didn't know if what I'd seen had already happened, or if it was happening live. I didn't know who the woman was. I didn't know what I was watching. And I didn't know if I was the only one watching it. That was the part that got under my skin. Not the footage itself, disturbing as it was. Not even the idea that someone was out there recording strangers. It was the implication that I was expected to see it. Not as a witness, as a participant. That night, I pulled all the blinds in the house. Not just closed them, taped them down. I shut the laptop, unplugged the router, left my phone on airplane mode. Then I packed the burner phone and the flash drive into a shoebox, duct taped it shut, and shoved it into the bottom of my closet behind a stack of old coats I hadn't worn since college. I wanted to believe that if I physically distanced myself from it, if I pushed it far enough away, it would lose interest in me. Like a stray dog that would stop following if you stopped feeding it. That worked for a little while. For almost 3 full days, everything was quiet. No van, no calls, no emails. I tried to work, tried to act like a normal person again. I even went out for groceries, walked the longer route around the neighborhood, just to keep my head clear. It was cloudy that day, drizzling, that kind of slow, soft rain that makes you feel like time is passing slower than it really is. It almost felt normal. Until I got home and found the envelope. It had been slid under my door, thick manila, no writing on it, not sealed. I picked it up slowly, already feeling that sinking weight in my stomach return. Inside were photos. Printed, glossy, full color. The first few were of my house, different angles. From the street, from the alley, one from my backyard near the fence line. Then they moved inside. Shots through my windows, me at my desk, me brushing my teeth, me eating on the couch with the TV on. But it was the last photo that nearly made me drop the envelope. It was a picture of me asleep, in bed, taken from inside the room. I stood there for a long time just holding it, chest tight, every part of me buzzing. It wasn't just that someone had been in the house. It was that I didn't know when. There had been no forced entry, no signs of a break-in. The locks were untouched, the windows all still latched. The alarm system, which I'd finally started using, had never gone off. Nothing. I tore through the house again, checked everything. Closets, crawl space. Even inside the vents, nothing. I found the shoebox still in place, unopened, untouched. That somehow made it worse. I called the police again. This time I didn't go through the formalities. I told them someone had been in my house and left behind surveillance photos. I told them it wasn't a prank, that I felt unsafe, that someone was stalking me. They said they'd send someone. An officer showed up an hour later. Young guy, polite but skeptical. He looked through the photos, took a few notes, asked if anything was missing. I told him no, just that they'd been inside. He asked if I had roommates, any exes who might want to mess with me. I said no. Then he asked if I had any enemies. That one caught me off guard. I almost laughed. What does that mean? Like people who want to kill me? He shrugged. Sometimes it's not about killing, just control or chaos. There are people who do stuff like this for fun. They like watching what happens when you know you're being watched. That stuck with me. They like watching what happens. He filed a report and said they'd follow up if anything came of it. I didn't believe him. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because of fear, exactly. Not even because I thought someone might come back. It was something else. This deep, creeping suspicion that I'd already crossed some invisible line. That it didn't matter what I did now. The door was open, and I hadn't closed it in time. The next morning, I called in sick again, made coffee I didn't drink, sat on the couch flipping through the photos until my hands went numb. Then I opened the laptop again. The live stream was gone. The link led to a blank page now, 404 not found. I checked the email it came from, deleted. The burner Gmail account had been wiped too. Everything I'd sent to it was gone. I tried the other drive's copies I'd made, backups I thought were safe. 2 wouldn't open. The third one had files, but when I clicked them, every video showed static. Corrupted. I dug the shoebox out from the closet and opened it. The original flash drive was gone. So was the burner phone. In their place was a note, typed in all lowercase on a strip of plain white paper. You don't need these anymore. That was it. No threats, no instructions, no explanation. Just confirmation. They'd been in my house again. Not just once, again. And they hadn't taken anything. They hadn't destroyed anything. They'd replaced the evidence with a message. They wanted me to know. That afternoon, I put everything I had left, the photos, the note, even the shoebox, into a garbage bag and drove it to the far side of the city. I tossed it into a random construction dumpster and walked away without looking back. I didn't know if it would help, but it was something. When I got home, there was nothing on my porch, no envelope, no phone call, no new emails. Just silence. For the first time since this started, I felt something close to peace. But it didn't last. Because just after midnight, my phone buzzed. Not the burner. My real one. And there, in my messages, was a single photo. Blurry, low resolution, but unmistakable. It was a picture of the woman from the live stream. This time she was asleep, and the photo had been taken from inside her room. I stared at the photo on my phone for a long time. I didn't save it. I didn't delete it. I just stared, like maybe if I looked long enough, I'd see something new, a detail I missed. A reflection in the mirror, a shadow in the corner, anything that would help me understand what I was actually looking at. But it was just her, the woman from the live stream, asleep in her bed. Same room, same blankets, same worn headboard, same angle as before, same sickening implication. Someone had been in her home, standing right there, just feet from where she slept. And somehow, they'd sent it to me. My personal number, not the burner, not email, me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know what this was anymore. It wasn't just voyeurism. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a trap, not in the traditional sense. This was something else, something deliberate, slow, like someone winding a clock, watching to see how long it would take for me to break. I tried calling the number back. Blocked. I tried saving the image, forwarding it to my computer, to my work account, to anywhere outside my phone. Every attempt failed. File cannot be transferred. Unsupported format. Corrupted attachment. But I could still see it, clear as day. I called the police, again, told them someone had broken into my home twice, had sent me a photo of a sleeping woman taken inside her bedroom. They asked if I knew her. I said no. They asked if I had the original message. I said yes. They told me to come in the next day and file a report in person. That was it. No urgency, no visit, no follow-up. Just a clipboard and a desk if I wanted it. I didn't sleep that night, again. I sat on the couch with all the lights on and tried to reason through it. Was this just punishment? For opening the box? For not reporting it soon enough? For seeing too much? Was I being warned? Or was I being invited? Because the more I thought about it, the more it started to feel like they didn't want me to run. They wanted me to watch. To keep watching. And every time I tried to pull away, they sent something new, a reminder that I was still part of this, whether I liked it or not. The next morning, I didn't go to the police station. I just couldn't. I didn't have anything solid, a blurry photo, a wiped flash drive, a phone that vanished from my own locked closet. It all sounded insane when I played it back in my head. Like something a person makes up when they're having a breakdown. Instead, I called in sick again. I couldn't even remember the last time I worked a full week. That afternoon, I started researching. Not on my main laptop. I used an old one I kept in the closet, barely functional, something I hadn't touched in years. I didn't log into any accounts, no Wi-Fi. Just tethered it to a mobile hotspot and started digging. I looked up missing persons in my area, surveillance crimes, burglary cases where nothing was taken, women who'd gone to the police about being followed but were dismissed. I combed through forums, comment sections, weird Reddit threads that skirted the edge of being removed. And I started seeing patterns. Most of the cases weren't connected by location or method. They didn't even fit the same age groups or neighborhoods. But they did have one thing in common. No one ever believed them. Most reports were dropped. The people who filed them stopped following up. In a few of the older threads, the original posters deleted their accounts entirely. One thread stood out. It was short, only 3 comments. The subject line just said, "I saw the van. What happens now?" The original post had been removed. So had the user. But someone had replied, a user called Passenger Seat, with an old account that hadn't posted since. The comment was simple, just 3 sentences. Don't try to track them. Don't call the cops again. Whatever you do, don't open the second package. That's what froze me. The second package. I hadn't received one. Not yet. But the way the message was written, not if, when made it clear that this was part of the pattern. You get one, you engage, and if you keep watching, they send another. An escalation. I shut the laptop and packed it back into the closet. And then I waited. I didn't want to. I didn't have a plan. But what else was there to do? The police wouldn't help. No one I knew would believe me. I couldn't send the photos, couldn't save the evidence, couldn't even hold on to the original hardware without it vanishing or corrupting. All I could do was try to stay ahead of whatever was coming next. But I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, it came. Same time, around 10 at night, just after dinner, while I was pretending to read. Another knock. Soft, just one. When I opened the door, no one was there. Just a box. Same duct tape, same red fragile sticker, same silence. I didn't bring it inside. Not this time. I left it on the porch, just stood there staring at it, heart pounding, hands shaking, trying to decide what to do. I grabbed my phone, took a photo of it. The screen went black as soon as I pressed the button. Just shut off completely. When I turned it back on, the image wasn't in my gallery. I tried again with a spare phone I'd bought the day before. Nothing. The moment the camera pointed at the box, the screen glitched and froze. It was like the box couldn't be recorded, couldn't be saved. I left it there overnight. In the morning, it was gone. No footprints, no tire marks, no sign it had ever been there at all. Just my porch, empty again. And in the middle of my welcome mat, a single item left behind. A key. I didn't touch the key for over an hour. I just stared at it from the other side of the glass door like it might disappear again if I blinked too long. It was small, brass, and worn smooth. No markings, no tag. Just a single, ordinary key lying in the center of my welcome mat like it belonged there. I opened the door and crouched down slowly, trying not to make any sudden moves. I don't know why. I was alone. But it felt like I was being watched again, and this time I didn't even bother to look for the van. I picked the key up. It was cold. No note, no box, no explanation. I took it inside, set it on the table, and backed away from it like it might bite. I didn't touch it again all day. That night, I stayed up scrolling through every locksmith forum I could find, looking at key types, blank codes, anything that might help me figure out what kind of lock it fit. I learned more than I ever needed to about pin tumblers, warded locks, and how many possible cuts a standard house key can have. None of it helped. I tried it on every door in my house. No match. I didn't expect one, but I had to check. At 2 a.m, I was still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at it under the overhead light like it might start speaking. I remember thinking, what if I'm not supposed to use it yet? What if I already have? That's when I noticed the envelope on my counter. It hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of it. Smaller than the last one, plain white, no name. Inside was a photo, just one this time. It was me, walking. Not recent, it had to be at least a month old. I was wearing my blue jacket, the one I lost on the train back in March. I was crossing a parking lot toward my old apartment, earbuds in, head down, completely unaware. But the angle it was taken from was strange. Too high for a normal person. I flipped the photo over. A date was scribbled on the back in black marker. Not the day the photo was taken. Tomorrow. That's when I started to understand. The key wasn't for something here. It was for something else. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat on the edge of my bed with the key in my hand and the photo face down beside me, trying to piece together what was happening. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were guiding me. Not with threats, not with force. With permission. That's what the key felt like. Not an order, not a message. An invitation. And for the first time since this all started, I wasn't afraid in the same way. I wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. I left the house early the next morning. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't bring my phone. I didn't take the car. I walked, with the key tucked into my jacket pocket and the photo in my back pocket, folded in half like it was mine. I didn't know where I was going until I got there. It was an old self-storage facility on the west side of town. I'd passed it dozens of times over the years, but never paid much attention. It had one of those faded signs with crooked letters and a number to call that no one ever answers. The front gate was open. No one at the desk. The place was empty, quiet. Rows of steel doors stretching down long concrete corridors that smelled like dust and oil and old cardboard. I didn't need a map. I turned left, then right, then stopped at Unit 37. The door was painted red, same color as the fragile sticker. The key slid into the lock like it had been waiting. I hesitated. just for a second. Then I turned it. The latch popped with a soft clunk. The overhead bulb in the corridor flickered once. Then I lifted the door. Inside it was dark. No light, no motion. Just shelves. Floor-to-ceiling metal racks, maybe 10 feet deep. Every inch of them filled with cardboard boxes, all identical. Same size, same duct tape, same red sticker. Some were labeled, some weren't, some had names, most didn't. There had to be hundreds of them. I stepped inside. It felt like walking into a library where nothing had ever been read. I ran my fingers along the boxes, not really sure what I was looking for. And then I saw it. A box with my name on it. Printed in bold marker across the top flap. Underneath, a date. Today's date. I opened it. Inside was a phone. Not a burner this time. A smartphone. Standard. Black case. It vibrated the moment I picked it up. No lock screen, no password. Just a single open window. A video. I pressed play. It was a live stream. Of me. Standing in the storage unit, holding the phone. I looked up, then back down at the screen. The feed was live. No delay. A perfect mirror, 1 second behind. I turned slowly, heart hammering, scanning the corners of the unit. No visible camera, no sound, just the quiet hum of the corridor bulb and the echo of my own breathing. Then, on the screen, a second video window popped open. Split screen. On the right, a live feed of someone else, a woman, not the one from before, a different one, walking through her apartment, towel on her head, brushing her teeth. No awareness that anyone was watching. Below the video were 2 buttons, archive and forward. That was it. No names, no instructions, just options. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long. Eventually, I put the phone back in the box. I closed the lid. I locked the unit behind me. I walked home. That was 4 days ago. No more packages have come. No more photos, no more knocks, no more vans. Just silence. But sometimes at night, I still think about those 2 buttons. Archive. Forward. And I wonder how many people actually press them. I never told anyone about the storage unit. Not the police, not my coworkers, not the few friends I still talk to, not even my brother, who's the kind of guy who would believe me without asking for proof. Because that's the thing about stories like this, once you say them out loud, they stop sounding real. The more detail you give, the less anyone believes. It becomes easier to assume something's wrong with you, not the world. Safer too. So I stayed quiet. The phone stayed in the box. The box stayed in the unit. And the key stayed in my desk drawer, where I could see it every morning when I reached for my wallet. For the first few days, I didn't sleep much. Every little noise at night made me freeze. I kept checking the window, waiting to see the van again, but nothing came. Not a sound, not a message. The air around me stopped vibrating. It was like they were done with me. And for a while, I believed that. But then something strange started happening. I started noticing other people. Not in the obvious sense. Not staring at me or following me. Not others, like you see in movies, lurking in black coats. Just other people. At coffee shops, on the bus, at the library, people who sat too still, who didn't touch their drinks, who didn't scroll their phones, people who watched. Not me, just everything. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. A certain stillness, a focus, like they're waiting for something to happen, and they already know what it's going to be. That's when I understood. I hadn't been singled out. I'd been inducted. Not into a club, not a cult, just a system, a pattern, something old and invisible and quiet that most people pass by without ever noticing. But once you open that first box, you stop being most people. It's been 3 weeks since I went to the storage unit. I went back once. I told myself I wasn't going to open the box, that I just needed to know if it was still there, but I already knew it would be. Same box, same phone, same 2 buttons. Only this time, there were more names on the shelves. Labeled, tagged, dated. I didn't recognize any of them, but one of them near the bottom, close to the wall, had today's date on it, just like mine did the first time. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The phone in my box vibrated when I touched it, the same way it did before. It lit up on its own. There was no live stream this time, no face, just text. You understand now. I didn't reply. I put it back and left. When I got home, there was nothing on the porch, nothing in the mail, nothing under the mat. But there was a man sitting on the bench across the street. Middle-aged, business casual, paper cup in hand. He never looked at me. But I knew. He'd opened his box, too. That's how this works. You're given a glimpse, a key, a choice, and whether you use it or not, you're marked by it, changed. Your role begins the second you know. There's no ceremony, no reward, no speech. Just silence. And responsibility, because this isn't a chain of violence. It's a chain of observation, and now I'm part of it. It took me a while to make peace with that. At first, I thought I'd go to the police again, try to push harder, bring them the key, demand an investigation, but what would I say? That I was being watched by people who didn't threaten me. That I was sent a phone that let me look into people's lives, and instead of turning it over, I kept it. That I was curious? There's no way to say that and come out clean. So I chose something else. I made a decision. I went to the unit one last time. I brought a fresh phone, factory reset, no accounts. I opened the box, picked up the original phone, and watched the screen light up again. Another stream. Another woman. Different this time, older. Maybe in her 50s, watering plants, listening to music, completely unaware. Below her feed, the buttons. Archive, forward. I didn't touch them. Not for a long time. And when I finally did, I pressed archive. The screen went black. That's all that happened. No confirmation, No sound. Just gone. I put the phone back in the box and closed the lid. When I stepped outside, the sky was just starting to turn. That soft pink blue that comes before sunrise, where the air smells faintly like electricity. The world was still the same. But I wasn't. I didn't feel proud or brave. I just felt steady, like I'd finally settled into whatever this is. And now, I think I understand my place. I don't get to walk away, but I do get to choose. Every day. What to see, what to pass on, what to stop. And maybe that's the point. Maybe this whole thing doesn't exist to create harm, but to decide who lets it happen, who passes it forward without thinking, who looks, shrugs, and clicks. There are more units, more shelves, more boxes, more people waking up to a world that doesn't quite fit the shape they thought it had. And some of them will press forward. But not me. Not today. Tomorrow, maybe, but not today. We had only been in the new house for a few weeks when the drawing showed up. It was a quiet cul-de-sac in Birmingham, the kind of place where neighbors wave from their driveways and kids ride bikes until the streetlights flicker on. Our daughter Ellie had already made a few friends, and one of them was a boy named Callum. He lived 2 doors down and had a habit of sketching houses in the neighborhood. It was his thing. Every few days he would hand someone a crayon drawing of their home, complete with stick figures and smiling suns. It was sweet, really, a little odd maybe, but harmless. One afternoon, Ellie came home with a folded piece of paper. "Callum drew our house," she said, holding it out with a grin. I unfolded it, expecting the usual childlike scrawl, and it was, mostly, the red brick facade, the white door, the 2 front windows. Even the garden gnome we had inherited from the previous owners was there, standing sentinel by the walkway. But then I noticed the attic window. It was small, tucked beneath the sloping roof, and in the drawing it was shaded dark. Inside a figure stood, not a stick figure like the rest, but a tall, thin shape with glowing eyes. 2 bright circles staring out from the blackness. I frowned. "Ellie, did Callum say anything about this?" She shrugged. "He said it's the man who sleeps up there. He watches you." A chill ran down my spine. Our attic window doesn't face the street. It's on the side of the house overlooking the backyard. From the front, it's not visible at all. For Callum to draw it, he'd have to know what it looked like. He'd have to have seen it from inside. That night, I mentioned it to my husband, Mark. "Probably just his imagination," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "Kids make stuff up all the time." "Maybe," I replied, but the unease lingered. The next day, I decided to talk to Callum's mother, Sarah. We had exchanged pleasantries before, but this was the first time I approached her with concern. "Hi, Sarah," I began. "I wanted to ask you about Callum's drawings." She smiled warmly. "Oh yes, he's always been into art. Loves drawing houses." "I noticed he drew our attic window," I said carefully. "It's not visible from the street." Her smile faltered. "Well, he has a vivid imagination. Sometimes he adds things that aren't there." Did he ever mention being inside our house? She shook her head. No, I don't think so. Why? I hesitated. He said there's a man who sleeps in our attic, that he watches us. Sarah's expression turned serious. I'm sorry. That does sound unsettling. I'll talk to him. I thanked her and left, feeling no more at ease than before. That evening I decided to check the attic. The entrance was a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. I climbed up, flashlight in hand, and pushed open the hatch. The attic was empty, just as we had left it. A few boxes, some old furniture, and a layer of dust covering everything. No signs of anyone living there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Over the next few days I tried to put it out of my mind, but then strange things started happening. I would find the attic hatch slightly ajar, even though I was sure I had closed it. Items in the house seemed to move on their own. A book left on the coffee table would be on the floor the next morning. The kitchen light would be on when I was certain I had turned it off. One night I woke up to the sound of footsteps above us. Mark was asleep beside me, and Ellie was in her room. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, moving across the attic floor. I nudged Mark awake. Do you hear that? He listened, then shook his head, probably the house settling. No, I insisted. It's footsteps. He sighed and got out of bed. I'll check. I followed him to the hallway. He pulled down the ladder and climbed up, flashlight in hand. Nothing up here, he called down after a few minutes. Just the usual stuff. I still felt uneasy. The next morning, I found another drawing on our doorstep. It was of our house again, but this time, the figure in the attic window was larger, more detailed. The glowing eyes were more pronounced, and the figure's hand was pressed against the glass. I showed it to Mark. This is getting creepy, he admitted. Maybe we should install some cameras. We set up a security system, placing cameras around the house and one in the attic. That night, we monitored the feeds from our phones. Around 2 a.m, the attic camera picked up movement. A shadow passed across the screen, then disappeared. Mark grabbed a baseball bat and headed for the attic. I followed, heart pounding. He climbed up and shone the flashlight around. Nothing, he said, but the camera picked up something. We reviewed the footage again. The shadow was there, unmistakable. We called the police. An officer arrived and inspected the attic. He found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone living there. Could be a glitch in the camera, he suggested. But we knew what we saw. The next day, I spoke to Sarah again. Has Callum said anything else about the man in our attic? She looked uncomfortable. He mentioned that the man is sad, that he watches because he's lonely. I felt a shiver run through me. Does he say where he comes from? She hesitated. Callum says he was here before your family moved in. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the figure in the attic, the glowing eyes, the sense of being watched. I decided to go up there one more time. I climbed the ladder, flashlight in hand, and looked around. In the corner, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small, childlike drawing on the wall. It was of our house, with the attic window shaded dark and inside the figure with glowing eyes. Beneath it, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "He watches because he's lonely." I stared at it, heart pounding. Who had drawn this? When? I climbed down and closed the hatch, making sure it was secure. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. The morning after discovering the drawing in the attic, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. The figure with glowing eyes, the child's handwriting, "He watches because he's lonely." It all felt too deliberate, too personal. I decided to take a day off work to clear my head and perhaps find some rational explanation. I spent the morning researching the history of our house. The local library had archives of property records and old newspapers. I hoped to find anything that could shed light on the strange occurrences. The librarian, a kind elderly woman named Margaret, helped me navigate the dusty files. After hours of sifting through documents, I found a newspaper article from decades ago. It detailed a tragic incident. A man named Thomas lived in our house and was found dead in the attic. The article mentioned that he was a recluse, rarely seen by neighbors, and had no known family. The cause of death was listed as natural causes, but the circumstances were odd. He had been dead for weeks before anyone noticed. I felt a chill run down my spine. Could this be the man Callum referred to? The one who sleeps up there and watches us? I photocopied the article and took it home. That evening, I showed the article to Mark. He read it silently, his brow furrowed. "This is unsettling," he admitted, "but it was a long time ago. Maybe it's just a coincidence." "Maybe," I replied, though I wasn't convinced. We decided to talk to Callum again. Perhaps he knew more than he let on. The next day, we invited him over for some lemonade and biscuits. He arrived, cheerful as ever, clutching his sketch pad. "Callum," I began gently, "can you tell us more about the man in the attic?" He looked up, his expression serious. "He's always there. He watches because he's lonely." "How do you know he's there?" Mark asked. Callum shrugged. "He told me." Mark and I exchanged glances. "He spoke to you?" Callum nodded. "In my dreams. He says he used to live here and misses it." I felt a lump form in my throat. Did he say his name? Callum thought for a moment. "Thomas." That was the name from the article. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Thank you, Callum," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's very helpful." After Callum left, Mark and I sat in silence. "This is getting too strange," he said finally. "Maybe we should have the house blessed or something." I nodded. "It's worth a try." We contacted a local priest, Father Andrew, who agreed to come by the next day. He arrived with a calm demeanor and listened patiently as we recounted the events. "I've dealt with similar situations," he said. "Sometimes spirits linger due to unresolved matters. A blessing might help." He walked through the house, sprinkling holy water and reciting prayers. When he reached the attic, he paused. "This place feels heavy," he murmured, "as if someone is still holding on." He performed a more thorough blessing in the attic, then turned to us. "I suggest you speak to him," he said. "Let him know it's time to move on." That night, I stood in the attic, heart pounding. "Thomas," I said aloud, "I know you used to live here, but it's time to rest. You don't have to watch over us anymore." The air felt still, almost expectant. I waited, but nothing happened. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences ceased. The attic hatch remained closed, and there were no more drawings. I began to relax, thinking perhaps the blessing had worked. Then, one morning, I found a new drawing on our doorstep. It was our house again, but this time the figure in the attic was smiling. The glowing eyes were softer, and beneath the drawing were the words, "Thank you." I showed it to Mark, who smiled. "Maybe he just needed to be acknowledged," he said. I nodded, feeling a sense of peace. From that day on, there were no more disturbances. The house felt lighter, more welcoming. Callum continued to draw, but his sketches were now of gardens and sunny days. Life returned to normal, and I often thought of Thomas, hoping he had found the rest he deserved. After the blessing, things seemed to settle. The house felt lighter, and the oppressive atmosphere that had lingered since we moved in began to dissipate. Mark and I started to relax, believing that perhaps the spirit of Thomas had finally found peace. Ellie returned to her cheerful self, and even Callum's drawings took on a more vibrant tone, depicting sunny days and playful scenes. But peace, as we soon discovered, was fleeting. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Ellie approached me with a concerned expression. "Mom," she said, "Callum gave me another drawing today." I dried my hands and took the paper from her. It was our house again, but this time the figure in the attic window was different. The glowing eyes were gone, replaced by a dark, featureless silhouette. Beneath the drawing, in Callum's neat handwriting, were the words, "He's not alone." A chill ran down my spine. "Did Callum say anything else?" I asked. Ellie nodded. "He said the man has a friend now, someone who doesn't like us." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Callum's words in my mind. Who was this new presence, and why did it feel so menacing? The next morning, I decided to speak with Sarah again. She greeted me warmly, but her smile faded when I mentioned the new drawing. "Callum's been having nightmares," she admitted. "He talks in his sleep, says things about shadows and whispers. I've been meaning to talk to you about it." I shared my concerns, and we agreed to keep a closer eye on the children. Days passed, and the atmosphere in our home grew tense once more. Strange occurrences resumed. Objects moved on their own, cold spots appeared in rooms, and the unsettling feeling of being watched returned. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, I discovered something peculiar. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard was an old dusty journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was elegant and precise. As I flipped through the pages, I realized it belonged to Thomas. He wrote about his loneliness, his longing for companionship, and his belief that the house was alive, watching him. But towards the end, the entries took a darker turn. He mentioned a presence, a shadow that whispered to him, urging him to do unspeakable things. I felt a knot form in my stomach. That evening, I shared the journal with Mark. He read it silently, his brow furrowed. "This shadow," he said, "it might be what's causing all of this." We decided to consult Father Andrew again. He listened intently as we recounted the recent events and examined the journal. "This is troubling," he said. "It seems Thomas wasn't just haunted by loneliness, but by something malevolent, a dark entity that may still reside in your home." He suggested a more thorough cleansing of the house, one that would require preparation and spiritual fortitude. In the days leading up to the cleansing, the disturbances intensified. Ellie began sleepwalking, often found standing beneath the attic hatch, staring upward. Mark started experiencing vivid nightmares, waking up drenched in sweat and gasping for air. The night before the cleansing, I awoke to a faint whispering. I followed the sound to the attic, where I found the hatch slightly ajar. Summoning my courage, I climbed the ladder and peeked inside. The attic was dark, but in the corner I saw two figures. One was the familiar silhouette of Thomas, his form faint and translucent. The other was a darker, more solid shadow, its presence oppressive and cold. They turned to face me, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. The dark figure stepped forward, and I quickly retreated, slamming the hatch shut. The next day, Father Andrew arrived with two fellow priests. They conducted a thorough cleansing, reciting prayers and sprinkling holy water in every room. The atmosphere grew tense, and at one point, a loud crash echoed from the attic. After the ritual, Father Andrew approached us. "The dark presence has been weakened," he said, "but it's not gone. It feeds on fear and negativity. You must remain vigilant and keep your home filled with light and love." We took his advice to heart. We filled our home with laughter, music, and warmth. We spent more time together as a family, creating positive memories to counteract the darkness. Over time, the disturbances lessened. Callum's drawings returned to their cheerful nature, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. But every so often, I catch a glimpse of a shadow in the corner of my eye, or hear a faint whisper in the night. I know the darkness still lingers, waiting for a moment of weakness. And so, we remain vigilant, determined to protect our home and each other from the shadows that dwell within. The days following the second cleansing were quiet, almost unnaturally so. The house felt still, as if it were holding its breath. Mark and I tried to resume our normal routines, but a lingering unease clung to us. Ellie, however, seemed unaffected, her laughter echoing through the halls as she played with her toys. One afternoon, as I was tidying up the living room, I noticed a new drawing pinned to the refrigerator. It was another of Callum's creations, depicting our house once more. But this time the attic window was empty. No figures, no glowing eyes, just a blank pane of glass. Beneath the drawing, in Callum's neat handwriting, were the words, "He left." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Perhaps the second cleansing had worked. Maybe Thomas had finally found peace. That evening I decided to bake a batch of cookies and invite Sarah and Callum over for tea. As we sat around the kitchen table, the children playing nearby, I brought up the drawing. "Callum said the man left," I mentioned, trying to sound casual. Sarah nodded. "Yes, he told me the same. Said the man found a new home." "A new home?" I asked, puzzled. She hesitated. "He said the man moved into someone else's attic." I felt a chill run down my spine. Did he say whose? Sarah shook her head. "No, just that it was someone nearby." The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but I couldn't shake the unease that settled over me. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, wondering who the new occupant of the attic might be. The following morning, I received a call from our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. She sounded distressed. "Have you noticed anything strange lately?" she asked. I hesitated. "What do you mean?" "Odd noises, things moving on their own. My attic light keeps flickering, and I swear I hear footsteps up there at night." A knot formed in my stomach. "Have you checked the attic?" "Yes, but there's nothing there. Just old boxes and dust." I considered telling her about Thomas, but decided against it. Instead, I suggested she have her house blessed, just in case. Over the next few days, more neighbors reported similar occurrences: flickering lights, unexplained noises, and a general sense of unease. It seemed the presence had indeed moved on, but not far. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Ellie approached me with a concerned expression. "Mom, Callum gave me another drawing." I took the paper from her and unfolded it. It was our street, each house meticulously drawn. In the attic window of each house, a small, dark figure stood. Beneath the drawing were the words, "He visits everyone now." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The presence hadn't just moved, it was spreading. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the lights on, listening for any unusual sounds. Around midnight, I heard a faint creaking noise coming from the attic. I held my breath, straining to hear more. The creaking continued, slow and deliberate. I woke Mark, and together we climbed the ladder to the attic. The space was empty, just as before, but the air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. We decided to consult Father Andrew once more. He arrived the next day, concern etched on his face. "This is unusual," he admitted. "Spirits don't typically move from house to house like this." "Is there anything we can do?" I asked. He nodded. "We can perform a neighborhood cleansing, but it will require the participation of all the residents." We spent the next few days speaking with our neighbors, explaining the situation as delicately as possible. Some were skeptical, others frightened, but eventually everyone agreed to participate. On the appointed day, Father Andrew led the cleansing, moving from house to house, reciting prayers and sprinkling holy water. The atmosphere was tense, but hopeful. After the ritual, the neighborhood felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The strange occurrences ceased, and life slowly returned to normal. Weeks passed without incident. Ellie and Callum continued to play together, their laughter a comforting sound. The drawing stopped, and the attic remained quiet. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending to the garden, Callum approached me. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "I have something for you." He handed me a drawing, this one different from the others. It depicted our house bathed in sunlight, flowers blooming in the garden, and no figure in the attic window. Beneath the drawing were the words, "Peace." I smiled, tears welling in my eyes. "Thank you, Callum." As he ran off to play with Ellie, I looked up at the attic window. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly at ease. But deep down, I knew that peace could be fragile, and sometimes the past has a way of returning when you least expect it. The days following the neighborhood cleansing were filled with a cautious optimism. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive atmosphere that had once clung to our homes seemed to have dissipated. Children played outside without fear, and neighbors greeted each other with genuine smiles. It was as if a collective weight had been lifted from our shoulders. However, beneath the surface, a lingering unease remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching, waiting. The silence felt too complete, too artificial. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Ellie approached me with a drawing in her hand. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Mom," she said softly, "Callum gave me this today." I took the paper from her and unfolded it. It was our house again, meticulously drawn with crayon, but this time the attic window was different. Instead of a figure, there was a swirling mass of darkness, as if the crayon had been pressed harder, the strokes more frantic. Beneath the drawing were the words, "He's changing." A chill ran down my spine. I looked at Ellie, who was watching me intently. "Did Callum say anything else?" I asked. She nodded. "He said the man isn't the same anymore. He's angrier." That night, I found it difficult to sleep. The house was silent, but every creak and groan felt amplified. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of the drawing and Callum's ominous words. Around midnight, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the attic. I held my breath, straining to listen. The scratching continued, rhythmic and deliberate. I nudged Mark awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He listened for a moment before nodding. "It's probably just a mouse or something." But I wasn't convinced. The sound was too deliberate, too intentional. The next morning I decided to investigate. I climbed the ladder to the attic, flashlight in hand. The space was as we had left it, dusty boxes, old furniture, and cobwebs. But in the corner, near the window, I noticed something new. There were deep scratch marks on the wooden floor, as if someone or something had been clawing at it. The marks were fresh, the wood splintered and raw. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. I needed answers. I reached out to Father Andrew once more. He arrived later that day, his expression grave as I showed him the drawing and the scratch marks. "This is concerning," he said. "It seems the presence hasn't left. If anything, it's growing stronger." He suggested another cleansing, this time focusing solely on our house. That evening, he performed the ritual, reciting prayers and sprinkling holy water in every room. The atmosphere felt tense, the air thick with anticipation. As he concluded the ceremony, a loud bang echoed from the attic. We rushed upstairs, but the space was empty. The scratch marks, however, had multiplied, covering the floor in chaotic patterns. Father Andrew looked at me, his eyes filled with concern. "This entity is feeding on fear. We need to remain strong." In the days that followed, the disturbances escalated. Lights flickered, objects moved on their own, and the oppressive feeling returned with a vengeance. Ellie began having nightmares, waking up screaming about the man in the attic. One night, I awoke to find her standing at the foot of our bed, her eyes wide with terror. "He's here," she whispered. "He's in the house." I jumped out of bed and checked every room, but there was no sign of an intruder. Still, the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Desperate for a solution, I began researching the history of our home. I discovered that before Thomas, the house had been owned by a man named Harold, who had mysteriously disappeared. Neighbors at the time spoke of strange occurrences and a sense of dread that permeated the property. It seemed our home had a long history of darkness. Determined to protect my family, I decided to confront the entity directly. That night, I climbed into the attic alone, flashlight in hand. "Whoever you are," I said aloud, "you are not welcome here. This is our home now, and we will not live in fear." The air grew colder, and a low growl echoed through the space. I stood my ground, repeating the words until the growling ceased. As I descended the ladder, I felt a sense of resolve. I would not let this entity control our lives. The following morning, Ellie handed me another drawing. This one depicted our family standing together, holding hands with the house in the background. The attic window was empty. Beneath the drawing were the words, "He knows you're not afraid." I smiled, tears welling in my eyes. Perhaps by facing our fear, we had weakened the entity's hold. But deep down, I knew the battle wasn't over. The darkness still lingered, waiting for an opportunity to return. We really have no idea what is going on, but I'll come back here and post if anything else happens. Please pray for us.